and then take it.
Well,
from
I mean,
there.
what everyone keeps thinking is going to happen at this two-stage. I mean, I just don't see how that's going to happen.
I can't see.
Can't
that.
have Hamas
That's
in charge, can they?
And people keep pointing to Egypt, saying, "Well, things have happened in the past."
Yeah, exactly.
People can get on, can they?
And again, there is so much happening right now. I mean, the Chagos silences. There's just so many things that are going on. You're thinking these are all intractable things that we really need to get on top of, and maybe throwing some new ideas out there might actually be a start.
Why can't he let the Chagos thing go? I mean, what's the? I know
there is
something. I know the Tories kick this off.
You know me, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I just think a lot of his mates are making a lot of money. That's all I'm saying. Big thanks
You've
to
just gone up to
Benedict
92%.
Big thanks to Peter Carwell for joining us. This madman's up next in Collins. I'm done for the day, but I'm still.
Good afternoon. 3 minutes after 1 o'clock. Thank you to Julia. Back tomorrow, of course, at 10 o'clock. Lots to get through. We are going to, of course, talk Donald Trump. Fascinating. Being accused of calling for ethnic cleansing after saying that he wants America to own Gaza, relocate 2 million Palestinians and transform it into the Riviera of the Middle East. But is there some curious, possibly slightly bizarre method in what appears to be a bit of madness? We'll look at that in more details in a few moments' time. Also this afternoon, the family of 3 people stabbed to death in Nottingham back in 2023 have slammed the NHS as a horror show, accusing staff of failing to properly handle the killer. This was the Valdo Calocane story, of course. It was horrendous, horrific and heartbreaking. Are there questions that need answering? We'll have more on that story as well. And Prime Minister Keir Starmer has defended meeting a voice coach during lockdown in the winter of 2020, saying he was working while the Tories were partying. I think he met the voice coach on, was it Christmas Eve or something? What the hell was that all about? Went well, Keir, didn't it? 0344 499 1000. That is where you will find us. Welcome to the programme. You can, of course, drop us a voice note on that number too. It's kind of a unique way of bypassing the queues. So if you fancy just leaving a message, 0344 499 1000 on WhatsApp, you can do it that way, totally fine. And of course, you can message us on 87222. You might be watching us on YouTube, you might be watching us on Freeview, you might be all over the place on this. We are literally everywhere, omnipresent, right the way through the entire nation and beyond. So, can Trump create peace in the Middle East? I mean, let me put the question like that. Can he create peace in the Middle East? He's essentially said that America wants to own Gaza. I mean, this is an extraordinary moment in a press conference with Netanyahu standing next to him. I would assume Mr. Netanyahu had some notice of what the president was going to say. They'd had a meeting, and this was their meet the press moment. Plans to occupy and rebuild Gaza they've been widely condemned, I think we can say. Probably everywhere has said this is ridiculous. Mr. Trump said all Palestinians in Gaza should be resettled, saying there is no alternative for them as Gaza is a demolition site. He promised to rebuild the Strip into the Riviera of the Middle East. Now, just 1 second here. I mean, he's right about the fact that this is a demolition site, right? I mean, what are you meant to do in the next half an hour, in the next year, the next 2 years? The place has been broadly flattened. No one's going to live there for a long, long time. So how do you deal with that? What are you meant to do? He's talking about other countries stepping in and doing their bit. And, you know, he talks about Egypt in that equation as well. Saudi Arabia, of course, who's a really crucial ally to America, weighed in and in a sharply worded statement noting that its long call for an independent Palestine state was a firm, steadfast and unwavering position. The Australians have said the same thing. The Aussie Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said that Australia has long supported a two-state solution in the Middle East and that nothing has changed. He said Australia's position is the same as it was this morning, as it was last year, as it was 10 years ago. And I think that position is probably even echoed by most countries around the world. But I did look at this and think, well, you know, in the absence of any other solution, I mean, Trump's throwing it up there. I don't believe for 1 second that Trump is going to bed at night thinking, I can see it now, the Riviera with the cafes, Trump Towers right in the middle, a big statue of the Donald in the town square. Lots going on, a completely different, you know, it's a nice idea. I don't think anyone seriously buys that in its entirety. But the idea that right now you're going to somehow find a place for everybody to resettle in Gaza is just not going to happen. So you've got to do something. So he's thrown this one up in the air, and that's the nearest I can really get to perhaps what the game or the point of those statements were. In the absence of anything else, I wonder whether it's as simple as that. Has he just thrown it up into the air, hoping that something will land? I don't imagine you're going to hear many Western countries say that they are going to support this idea. Giorgia Meloni, of course, the PM of Italy, they're on very good terms with Donald Trump and America. She offered a very cautious response to the suggestion that Gaza should be emptied of Palestinians, redeveloped. So she's not quite as on board. And if she's not on board, then you begin to see why this would be a problem. But I can't believe that Donald Trump was speaking literally. I know it sounded as if he was. He did say, look, I'm not trying to be smart or cute here. The hear me out kind of thing. There might be something in this. 0344 499 1000. I want to just gauge your views on this. It's not an area we would usually discuss in any great detail, but bearing in mind the sheer importance of this, the fact that there has been a horrendous, bloody war with so many people losing their lives, that the idea that we don't scratch and look into areas that previously would have been unpalatable would be ridiculous. Maybe we've got to do that. Can Trump create peace in the Middle East? Is he the man, Donald Trump, the comb-over king of Capitol Hill, who pitched up on a massive landslide and has gone into action in absolute rapid rate of knots territory on all sorts of areas, and here he is opining on this one while meeting the Israeli leader. Can it happen? Could it happen? Is he the bloke that's going to solve the problem? Let's speak with Isabel Oakeshott, Talks International editor. Isabel, good afternoon to you. You are more than a little au fait with foreign affairs. This one was somewhat of a curveball from Mr. Trump.
But it's classic Trump, isn't it? I mean, talk about thinking outside the box. And when you said that you don't think he's literally imagining, you know, Trump Towers and a golf course and hotels and a casino, oh, I think he's totally imagining that. That is exactly what he's imagining. And, you know, there's a bit of me that just loves the kind of freewheeling nature of this president and the way he thinks. Because let's face it, nothing that anyone has tried for the last several decades has had any effect whatsoever, has it?
100%.
You know, just think back to Tony Blair. He was going to bring peace to the Middle East. That was his whole thing. You know, after he left office, absolutely nothing's got anything other than worse, as we saw with the outrages on October the 7th. So, you know, is there any point in continuing to pursue a strategy, the two-state solution, which has never proven possible at all? You know, the Israelis aren't going to live with it. You know, Clearly Trump's right that the whole the kind of practical situation in Gaza is pretty desperate. I mean, it's not like you can just move back into your old houses because much of them have been flattened. So in a sense, just how much money is America and the American taxpayer prepared to plow into this slightly bonkers idea? I mean, the American taxpayer doesn't really like pouring billions of pounds into overseas adventures. We know that, and actually Trump's the first to highlight that. You know,
Sure.
He's the one that wants to get American taxpayers out of those commitments. So this would be a colossal financial commitment. And I just wonder how he's going to sell that to the domestic voter. And as for selling it to the neighbors around Israel, they're not too keen on the idea. Why? Because how many kind of crazy nutters are going to be displaced and relocated? And are we just going to spread the problem of Hamas's terror organization and appalling tactics to neighbouring countries?
Yeah. Well, for those who didn't hear it, Isabel, let's have a reminder and a listen to Mr. Trump in action at that press conference talking about Gaza and the Middle East.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area. We have an opportunity to do something that could be phenomenal. And I don't want to be cute, I don't want to be a wise guy, but the Riviera of the Middle East, this could be something that could be so bad, this could be so magnificent.
It could be so magnificent, Isabel. And what's interesting, of course, in terms of displacement, for that would be the Palestinian people's central argument over many, many years, and the gradual incursion into what they see as their land, their territory, etc. I mean, this takes it to a whole other level, doesn't it? This is like, you know, even the Israelis hadn't even thought about this one. Even Netanyahu hadn't considered, I've got a good idea. Let's just get rid of everyone from this territory. We can have it for ourselves, or the region can have it, and these guys can go and live in Egypt and Jordan.
I mean, just look at it. Look at his face, though. Did you see Netanyahu's face in that press conference? I mean, my God, he looked absolutely delighted. You know, he can't believe his luck. You know, here comes a white knight riding to the rescue, just saying, don't worry, we're going to sort this out, you know, and basically regarding it just as a bit of a problematic piece of real estate, you know, a brownfield site that needs development, and in comes Trump with everything that's needed and sorts it out, and Bob's your uncle. You know, you've got a beautiful holiday resort for everybody. If only it were that simple. I kind of love to think that this might happen, but I think it's just going to bump up against reality in the region. It's going to bump up against domestic reality in America. And, the Israelis, of course, are absolutely over the moon with the idea, but how is it going to actually happen? I don't know. Then again, don't underestimate Trump. Maybe he can make it happen.
Maybe there is another plan there after all. Let's move on to this horrific and disturbing story, which has sort of been compounded with the news we're getting today. Valdo Calocane, the paranoid schizophrenic who killed 3 people in Nottingham, was discharged from mental health care despite a history of violence and a refusal to take medication. Let's have a listen to Neil Hudgell. Now, he's the solicitor acting on behalf of the family, speaking today about the failure to prevent Calocane from killing.
He got better in hospital, he got worse when released. He knew what taking his medication did for him. It slowed him down, it impaired his studies. He didn't like needles. He also knew what not taking his medicine did to him. He knew how it made him paranoid, knew that it made him violent. All of this was known to health professionals who observed the stockpiling of medication at his home. Those same health professionals who could have insisted on the administration of long-lasting injectable medication, also known as depot, prior to release, but didn't do so.
Here we are again, Isabel, with the same kind of story. A horrific incident happens and the authorities circle the wagons around it. Well, no, we tried to do this and we couldn't do that and we did our best here. I'm not suggesting any of these things are easy by definition. This whole world of dealing with extreme mental health and psychiatric issues is not easy. We understand that. But this clearly looks like a catalogue of huge errors.
Absolutely, and no wonder the families are so furious. The families of the victims of Calocane are so furious and devastated because it seems to them that it was preventable. Imagine pandering to that. Well, I'm not taking this because I don't like needles. And there's just too much of this, isn't there, with terrible, devastating consequences. A feeling. I think many voters probably feel that the general public are put last in all of this. The safety of the public, it always seems to come second to the, in quotes, human rights, or the very flexible interpretation of the human rights of those who are a danger to the public.
In terms of lessons learned, just to make these kind of stories even worse in some kind of way, Isabel, it's sort of the same reply every time, whether it's children whose lives have been brutalised or ended by horrific people around them, paedophilia, all of these same kind of stories. We hear the same response. Lessons will be learned, but it appears very few lessons are learned in these terrible incidents.
Well, and I suppose there's always more lessons to learn, and each individual horror is unique in its own way, and there's always something that's different about it from the last one, so there's not a perfect textbook to follow. But even if there were a perfect formula to follow in these cases, I don't think most people are confident that it would be followed and all those protocols would actually happen. The number of problems we have as a result of questionable use of public resources. There are going to be more of these cases, different types of things, and all the public will hear is lessons need to be learned. People are sick of it. They really are sick of it. They see the fundamentals aren't there. You look at policing. We talked a lot on talk about the amount of money that's being wasted in diversity and inclusion on the policing side of things. That takes police officers off what they really should be focused on and want to focus on, which is keeping us safe.
Well, you might think, I don't think that's too much to ask, is it really, in a civilised first world democracy, but it appears to be increasingly out of our reach. Isabel, stay with us. Lots more to talk about, including, of course, the COVID lockdown breach. question mark from the Prime Minister. The Chagos Island deal, what the heck is happening there? And we'll look at that and other stories with Isabel in a couple of moments' time. 0344 499 1000. Coming up on 1:20. This is Talk.
This is, I think, about putting pressure on all sides, basically, to behave. I mean, obviously...
You think it's one of his negotiating
positions? They're not actually going... Gaza is not about to become the 51st state.
That's Canada.
Yeah, well, it depends who wants it more. That's not going to happen. First and foremost, it's about putting a bit of pressure on Israel, about saying to the Israelis, look, you know, if you're not going to play nice, then we can just do what we want with this. We are big and powerful enough. But the whole thing about relocating people out of Gaza to the rest of the Arab world is also about saying to them, and you're going to have to play nice too.
Talk 22 minutes after 1 o'clock. Lots to get through. Isabel Oakeshott is with us, Talk's international editor, chewing the fat over the big stories of the day. Pressure heaping on Keir Starmer ahead of PMQs, of course. I don't know whether they landed any sufficient blows, but this was over the COVID lockdown breach allegation. I mean, it seems to me, Isabel, that there probably was a bit of a breach. I mean, I was never in favour of fining people for eating a bit of cake at their own surprise birthday party or any of that claptrap. Some people were, you know, a little ambitious with partying, I'm sure. But look, if Keir Starmer was the man that was very, very loud and very vocal on people who broke rules, he wanted those rules to be firmer and harder. But apparently one Christmas Eve, while the rest of us were wrapping gifts and pulling crackers, he was having a voice lesson.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very sceptical that this was just a voice lesson or even really a voice lesson. It's not credible that he was having a voice lesson with a mask on either, or that the voice coach was wearing a mask. Anyone who knows anything about voice coaching knows that that really wouldn't be an effective tutorial. And as we've said, and so many of our listeners have said, who the hell does that on Christmas Eve anyway?
Yes.
Let's say, I mean, he's not denying that this lady came round. I'm certain 100% that was a breach of the rules. On no planet is she or was she a key worker. I think a lot of people don't really care whether it was a breach of the rules that much now. What they care about is just a bit of the hypocrisy. And really, I think the most damaging thing for Keir Starmer here is the ridicule that it's exposed him to.
Yeah.
You know, his voice is already a source of much mockery and amusement, and now that's just made it even worse. And I think that's actually much more damaging for him than the possibility, or I would say probability stroke certainty, that something was breached there.
You've followed politics for a long time, Isabel. You know a good talker from a bad one. You know an honest one from a charlatan and all the rest of it. Could you honestly say, in your own objective assessment of Keir Starmer, when we think of great orators of our time, etc., we know that Mrs Thatcher had voice lessons herself to slightly lower her tonal kind of expressions. Could you honestly say you remember a time when you thought Keir Starmer wasn't the greatest of talkers, and then suddenly you woke up one day and went, God, this guy's really good? Was there a tipping point in Starmer's vocal capabilities?
No, there wasn't. Nothing much has changed, has it? I mean, there aren't that many good orators, you know, and I want to say that sometimes the best orators are not people you agree with at all. I mean, one of them is George Galloway. He's a wonderful public speaker. I don't like anything he says, but he's a brilliant orator. Another is Nigel Farage. There are very few that can actually stand up and just speak without any notes, with full confidence, and be utterly compelling. I mean, literally only a handful. Actually, Blair was a good one as well.
Yeah.
But, you know, I don't think Keir Starmer's going to trouble that.
There is something in that. I mean, it's either the power of delivery, the style, sometimes it's an unconventional facet to somebody's abilities. You know, I'm thinking of, you know, some of the union guys, Mick Lynch, people like that, very persuasive people, and they bat for their own side brilliantly. Dennis Skinner, when he was in Parliament, was also a good one. Tony Benn was able to turn in a good performance in that respect. It's not about, you know, necessarily agreeing with somebody politically. And as you rightly say, you know, Farage, there he was with that question in Parliament today, which he finally got out. And it was, you know, again, you know, people really, I mean, they were mocking a little bit on the other benches. They wanted to hear Nigel Farage. Those great speakers are few and far between. And I'm sorry, but our Prime Minister is not one of them.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned about Farage's question and Prime Minister's questions today, because I watched it with, you know, quite some. I was quite wowed by the way he played that. You know, the opposition were absolutely shouting him down. They were barracking him, and he completely went theatrical on it. He owned that with all these dramatic pauses. He let it play out. It was a brilliant way to handle it. That was Nigel Farage on very, very good form. I hope we're quickly going to have a time to talk about the Chagos, because that was fascinating as well.
Yeah, well, I was going to come on to that now. I mean, what is the deal then? What do you make of this? Curious. I know this began under the Tories, and the cudgels were picked up by Labour. I mean, is it therefore fair to say this was James Cleverly's deal than Rishi Sunak's, or does Keir Starmer have to own this?
What happened in Prime Minister's questions today was really interesting, because Keir Starmer started talking in very cryptic terms about how he knows something that we don't know. And he claims, or suggested, that so does the leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch. She also apparently knows something that the rest of us aren't allowed to know about why this has to happen. Now, I'm pretty sure that the Reform leadership doesn't know what this big secret is, but I don't think it's sustainable to treat the voter like that. We're talking about billions of pounds of taxpayers' money. And if there's some secret reason why this has to happen, the Prime Minister sure as hell needs to tell us what it is now. He implied, or very, very strongly said actually, not implied, that for national security reasons, he couldn't tell us what this is. That isn't going to hold water, I don't think. This is far too important. You know, this possibly there may be something to do with a nuclear deterrent here. I don't know. Is there some kind of nuclear dimension to this? Who knows? But I don't think he's going to get away with just saying, you know what, on this one, trust me, guys, you've got to just give away billions of pounds of our money and our territory. But you know what? You don't need to know why, because I've got it all covered. And you know,
that's not good enough, right? I mean, with something as significant as this.
I actually find it insulting to voters. We're not talking about a small matter here. You know, to me, what he is doing is a little short of treasonous, and I think that we need to know if there's something else to it. We, the voter, deserve to know what that is.
Yeah, or at least give us a clue here. You know, that would be helpful, be a helpful beginning. And of course, this could lead to a very tricky crossroads for that negotiation with Trump and our dealings with them, because he's not happy about that. And he's already said, you know, the UK has been a bit out of line. I think we can do some deals here, but this will be pivotal, I think, to Trump.
It's really problematic, and there is a possibility, and this is almost a sort of awful scenario, that Trump actually sort of lets this go through, but says that the US are not going to pay for it. They're not going to help us out with this multi-billion-pound so-called deal that we may be signing with the Mauritians. You know, the hope is obviously that the Americans would subsidize that, because they're the ones that are actually leasing it. You know, it's sort of their rent, as it were. Worst case scenario for us all is that Trump says, you know what, fine, go ahead with your stupid deal, but we, the Americans, were too busy spending our billions on turning Gaza into the Riviera of the Middle East.
True.
We're not having anything to do with this. At that point, that is lose, lose, lose.
And finally, this story, we did talk a lot about this yesterday, and of course it's ongoing, really, the Lucy Letby. Yeah, I mean, did not murder any kids, did murder kids. This ongoing sort of divide, it's just the most curious, and I don't want the word fascinating seems misplaced given the backdrop of what we're talking about here.
Because it's a tragedy, and of course I don't want to diminish that. And in fact, some of the parents of the lost, the killed babies, or you know, that as the law stands, they were murdered.
Yeah.
Have made that point. You know, they saw aspects of yesterday's press conference, which was, I think, chaired by David Davis MP, and a number of very eminent experts have come out and said, actually, there's real problems with this conviction.
Yeah.
A number of parents have felt that it was all a bit too showbiz. You know, David Davis referring to one of the leading experts there as the star of the show. But at the heart of this is the horrible, horrible possibility that the NHS has done what the NHS has absolute form in doing, and has covered up its own inadequacies and have allowed those to be projected onto an innocent woman. I'm not saying that's what I think, but I am saying that the NHS likes nothing better than a cover-up for its own systematic failures, particularly on neonatal wards, paediatric, you know, maternity services are notoriously bad in certain hospitals, and we've seen many cover-ups before. So if there is a possibility that this young lady is innocent, then it is only right that that is explored to the nth degree.
Spot on. Isabel, thank you. Isabel Oakeshott, She's Talks International Editor. Thank you to her. If you want to respond to any of what we've heard there on any of those stories, Shagos, the curious Lucy Letby, was there a miscarriage of justice story as well, voice coaching, and of course the question we threw out at the beginning, can Trump create peace in the Middle East? And we wouldn't normally be as, I don't know, as kind of blunt with a question like that, but had we not had somebody like Donald Trump making the kind of speech that somebody like Donald Trump likes to make, we probably wouldn't be going into this territory. But he says there's a plan here. We can make this happen. We just get rid of all the people that currently live there and send them to Jordan or Egypt or elsewhere. And then we make Gaza into a kind of Riviera. That's how you do it. And it's very simple, really. We now know lots of countries have come out in objection to this. Egypt, Saudi Arabia and others condemning this. Australia have been very vocal on this one as well. Even Italy, they're good friends with Trump, and Meloni is clearly politically very aligned with Donald Trump, but hasn't really given it any kind of big thumping endorsement. Does he mean it literally? Could it be the solution, as strange as it might sound? Is there an answer here? Will some Palestinians... I mean, if I was somebody who lived in the hellhole of that region under Hamas and somebody said, oh, we've got a nice, you know, little townhouse in Cairo that you can go and move in, so I'd take it. But I know the story is far more complex than just what your house looks like. I get it. 0344 499 1000. We'll discuss this and more in a couple of moments. This is Talk. Interesting how the Trump press conference, and I keep watching this back and I can't work out, is he serious? Is this a serious suggestion? Or is it a kind of semi-serious suggestion, as in, look, let's throw something out there that is so curveball territory, so unconventional, unprecedented in its suggestion, that it is going to start a kind of wider debate that will go into areas that we've never really utilised in this discussion. He says America will own Gaza. I mean, that's fairly audacious stuff to start with, to create a Riviera in the Middle East. That, and his idea to resettle 2 million Palestinians, has seen the US president accused of calling for ethnic cleansing. Keir Starmer says he wants to see Palestinians allowed home to rebuild their community on the way to a two-state solution. That does seem to be the... I think the common, if not exclusive, Western response. In a moment, we'll speak to Dr. Sheikh Ramzi, director at the Islamic Center, on this point. First, Elon Letby, former Israeli government spokesman, is with us. Elon, good afternoon to you. Just give us your reaction when you first heard Donald Trump say these words.
Hello, Ian. Broad astonishment in Israel, people trying to work out whether the president is serious or he's playing hardball in his negotiating tactics, but he puts his finger on a very important problem, and that's this. Gaza cannot be rebuilt as long as its government still says that Israel must be destroyed. Hamas is still under the control of the Hamas regime, a Hamas regime that says it will use the ceasefire to plan more attacks like the October 7th massacre. Hamas is still committed to permanent war against Israel. And so if we want reconstruction in Israel, if we want reconstruction in Gaza to be permanent, it cannot happen under Hamas. because reconstruction will just mean Hamas taking all that concrete, all that humanitarian aid, all that British taxpayer money, and putting it back into the tunnels that they built underneath Gaza in order to launch the war. And if we want peace, if we want permanent reconstruction, that cannot happen as long as Hamas still remains in control in Gaza.
So when Mr. Trump talked about, I mean, the Riviera stuff, I mean, make of that whatever you wish, but the prior to that, his point is, look, there's no way for people to live there. It's essentially a demolition site, and there is some accuracy, of course, in that, and therefore other countries should step in. Most countries, certainly in the area, Saudi Arabia most notably, of course, really are not supportive of this idea. So what, therefore, happens if there's no support for it? And certainly it's been described as ethnic cleansing by many. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, anyone who wants to leave Gaza of their own free will should be allowed to leave, okay? Asylum is a basic political right. No one should be forced to live under Hamas control against their will, and no one should be forced to live in a war zone. And Israel is saying there's nothing wrong if people want to leave, they should be allowed to leave. The question is how you rebuild Gaza, and we want to see Gaza rebuilt. But you can't have peaceful reconstruction in Gaza if its government is still committed to a permanent war against Israel. I think it's positive that we're seeing Palestinians talking about Gaza being their home and they're connected to their land and they want to stay there. Because most people in Gaza are classified as refugees by the UN, by UNRWA. They're being told by the UN that Gaza is not their home, that they should be relocated into Israel. And I would like to see an end to this war in which they rebuild peacefully inside Gaza and accept peace next to Israel. But obviously that can't happen as long as the Hamas jihadi regime remains in power in Gaza, threatening to do October 7th.
But that's not going away, is it? I mean, there might be a kind of a ceasefire, but there is no prospect of Hamas disappearing, as you know, Elon. That's not going to happen. So,
well, that is the reason that Israel's fighting this war. Israel says this war cannot end with the jihadi regime that started this war still in power, threatening to do it again and again. Gaza is a matter of a few football pitches away from people's homes in Israel. We want to bring the hostages home. And we mean home. We mean to the beds from which they were abducted on October 7th. And that can only happen if the Hamas jihadi regime is no longer their neighbor. This isn't Afghanistan, this isn't Iraq, this isn't thousands of miles away, this is meters away from people's homes in Israel. And so Israel's saying this war has to end with all the hostages home and Hamas removed from power so it doesn't do this again.
Do you think Mr. Netanyahu would be supportive of certainly the principle of Mr. Trump's idea that Palestinians would have to go and live in places like Egypt and Jordan and the like? That would be, I mean, maybe short term. I don't know what he was referring to, but certainly that's the area that has, clearly disturbed people. I mean, they will say this is our homeland. We don't want to go and live in Egypt. It might be next door, but lots of things are next door that we don't want to go and live in. And that's one of them. We want to stay here.
President Trump puts his finger on a very real problem, which is that Gaza is a demolition site now. It's rubble. And it's rubble because Gaza's government, Hamas, declared war on October 7th and waged that from tunnels underneath people's homes. And it is going to be a huge logistical challenge to rebuild that while there are people there, and Trump is suggesting that they move for the purpose of the reconstruction. But I can tell you what Israel's position is. The foreign minister spoke in the Knesset today. He said, Gaza is a failed experiment. That we can all agree on. The tragedy of Gaza is there was so much potential. When Israel withdrew, pulled out its soldiers, pulled out its settlers in 2005, and they decided to turn it into a little Taliban state, there's so much potential, and there is so much potential that can be achieved if the people of Gaza decide to embrace peace with Israel instead of it continuing to be ruled by a jihadi regime that wants to continue attacking Israel. So Israel's position is that anyone who wants to leave should be allowed to leave. There's no reason that people should be trapped in Gaza against their will. And if people want to rebuild peacefully, but really peacefully, next to Israel, not instead of it, that would probably be the best solution for all involved.
OK. Elon, thank you for your time. Elon Levy, former Israeli government spokesman, joining us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you to him. Let's speak with Dr. Sheikh Ramzi, director at the Islamic Centre. Dr. Ramzi, good afternoon to you. I'm sure there was lots you heard there that you'd like to reply to, but just broadly on the Donald Trump press conference, he wasn't trying to be cute, he said. They're his words. This might be the best idea. Get people to go and live elsewhere. Let's rebuild it. Let's make this place look like a Riviera. Your thoughts?
My thought, of course, is it doesn't just started with Donald Trump, which he said it is several years. It is several years happening, which they wanted to have a one-state solution. We were 8 years ago. I was in the United Nations. We talking with the Knesset. We talking with the leader of the Israel, and because I was a man of peace, they brought me, and they wanted it. They want only one state solution, and they want they get Gaza completely. They destroy the Gaza and make it once more the Holy Land. Of course, they don't know the Donald Trump want to make a big Trump Tower there and a golf course and so on. So I would think they are totally wrong, because the land is belonged to for several thousand years belong to the Palestinian, and it is inhuman. It is against the humanity. I never heard they taking the people for their land. They don't say we want a peace, we want a peace, we want a peace with for example, this is a terrorist, this is a terrorist. If the Hamas goes and Mamas come, he says you are a terrorist as well. If he come, Donald Trump come itself, they say you are a terrorist. They want the land, they want to steal the land, they want for themselves, they want to get a third temple to be done, because it's a 4,000 years of stories, histories.
But Palestinian people are living under a terrorist regime, OK? Would they not rather not live under a terrorist regime?
Absolutely, they can. Palestinian people can choose other one. Let them choose the other one.
That's not going to happen, though, is it? That's never going to happen.
Allow me, let them choose the other ones. There is no problem. We got a 2-3 million. What they want to do, they want to ethnic cleansing the whole nation. They want to take a name of the Palestine out of the world, as they taken it already. It is a land thief. They are very rich land there. They want the oil and whatever, and they destroyed it. Millions of, I don't know, tens of hundreds of tons of bomb they put it to destroy it, which they cannot be living there again. This is what the plan is. The plan, you have to look. Don't look at my.
So you think this was all part of a bigger plan to stop?
It absolutely is a greater Israel. They want the next one going to be take off the half of Egypt, half of the Syria, half of the other countries, and half of the Iraq. This is a greater Israel they're going, and I saw the plan. I saw the plan 8 years ago. This is how it goes, my friend. But what we need to do, they have to remember, Jewish people are lovely people. I'm saying Jewish people are one of the best people in the kindest. They are son of King David, son of Israel. They are best people, they are kindest. But of course, I don't know the government of the Israel which killing, where did it come from?
So have we got the same problem on both sides here, that, the people, and this is usually the case wherever you are, I'm sure, Russian people, Ukrainian people, nice people, but we have some issues around the governments and leadership, and similarly in Israel and Hamas, you're arguing that it's the leaders of both territories? Is that
absolutely. Let's take both leaders up. Let's take both leaders up. And I said many Dayan, many members of the parliament, which are rabbi, they are good people. Many of the, we take the Hamas away of that, and
but that's why we need Donald Trump, Dr. Ramzi. Maybe
Donald Trump is a man of money. Donald Trump does not
he might be, but maybe that is what is needed. I mean, you ask people, if you said to the Palestinian people, look, while we rebuild the place, we're going to make sure that everybody is accommodated in neighbouring countries and then come back. What's wrong with that?
lying, absolutely lying. They do not let them to come back. You believe me, my friend. If you're a human, if you're a humanity, we are, it doesn't matter if he's a Palestinian, if he's a Ukrainian, we are supporting, I'm a human rights activist, we are supporting all to help them all. Therefore, is against the human right. The United Nations says a two-state solution, the UK, United Kingdom says a two-state solution, Canada, everywhere they said, as
so
you mentioned.
Okay, you wouldn't trust. So even if, all right, even if to take it to the extreme, that individuals had a contract that said, look, when we've rebuilt this place, you can come back. It'll be Donald Trump's Riviera.
Why you don't?
You don't believe that?
Can I say one thing? 10 years ago, I said, why they don't buy the land from them? They have the money. Why they don't buy the houses? They destroy the houses. They take the houses. You are not in the Jewish religion. You are not to pray the place which is been stolen. The house been stolen. Do you pray? Is not right. It's a matter of a religion come to it, my friend. For that reason, invite him. It's not a matter of politics only. Without the religion, I remember one of our things said. One of the prime minister, Tony Blair, said, "Do you think Do you think without the religion talking together, the Muslim, Christian, and Jews which are living there, do you think they are going to get a result?" They are not, because from you send them to Egypt, from there they fight.
All right.
Then we have to sort it out once and for all.
So it spreads, it doesn't solve. All right, listen, Dr. Ramsey, thank you. It's passionate and emotive stuff. I understand that. I hope we will speak again on this. Dr. Sheikh Ramsey, he's the director over there at the Islamic Centre. Thank you to him. You can see the divide, you can see the problem, but we're talking about it. Is that the point of this? What many would say is a bit of a bonkers idea from Donald Trump. And remember, he put a caveat in this. He said, look, I'm not trying to be cute here. I'm saying this is possible. Now, most people are going, well, it's actually not possible. Not really. Not without upsetting a whole load of people along the way. But has this done what he intended it to do? And that's to throw a deck of cards high into the Middle East air and see what lands, as a way of getting things moving, maybe in a different direction. I say this, I ask that question somewhat naively, but it's my only interpretation I've got, so run with it and your thoughts on it. Can Trump create peace in the Middle East? 0344 499 1000, this is Talk.
full-length runway in Britain was built in the 1940s. No progress in 80 years. a third runway could increase potential GDP by 0.43% by 2050.
Could a new runway be built that abides with carbon targets, concerns around noise pollution and concerns around air pollution?
That a third runway at Heathrow would unlock further growth, boost investment, increase exports and make the UK more open and more connected.
One here from Gary who says, aren't all these countries that are calling for a two-state solution missing the rather obvious point that neither Hamas nor the Palestinians actually see that as a solution? I would say a more viable solution to this Middle East problem would be for a new Israeli state to be created within the US, where Israelis could live in peace. They could bring their money, their expertise, scientific knowledge and entrepreneurialism with them, which could only benefit the US economy. It may seem like a crazy idea, but think about it. Once the Israelis are out of the region, I don't see why the West need to have anything to do with the basket case that is the Middle East ever again. Just leave them to their desert wastelands, their centuries-old tribal disputes and their religious beliefs that are stuck in the Dark Ages, whilst the rest of us get on with our lives. And certainly, like all of these suggestions, when you put it like that, Gary, you go, well, yeah, what's not to like? You'd have to get lots of generations of Israelis to agree to move to Wyoming, I suppose, but if you were able, even if you were able to circumnavigate that. But of course, land and significance of land is the bit that's always missing from these points, similarly with Trump's points as well. This land is, you know, it's sacred, if you like. It is territory that is dictated to. It's significant, its historic reasoning, its place on the map, the geography is all relevant to people's desire to want to live there, of course. And of course, you could see that play out in other parts of Australia, for example, even in New Zealand, where, you know, certainly those that will claim that their birthright gives them almost a more significant status than anyone that came afterwards, that it's not just about somebody building you a house, it's where you built the house that's just as important. Let's go to Matt, who's in Cheshire on this point of Trump. What are you thinking, Matt? Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon, Ian. Just sort of jokingly, I can see it already, Hamas holiday haven and Genocide Creek golf course.
Yeah, the Hezbollah bowling alley. You know, it's all ready to ready to happen. It's absolutely ripe for, you know, some dark satire, isn't it?
Yeah, I think Ash Sarkar is already calling it ethnic cleansing.
Yeah, well, she would, wouldn't she?
Even before a shovel has been laid in the ground.
Yeah.
And we seem to forget that Trump is the world heavyweight champion of getting people talking about things, even if they're never going to happen.
Yeah, good point.
So I think what he's doing is more or less saying, if we put a few troops there and you want to start doing what you've just done the other year again with our troops there,
yeah.
You've seen what Israel's army can do, just think what we could do. And that in itself, just the thought of that is probably enough to make Hamas think again. And he's already got some massive sort of things done in the last week without even doing anything.
It looks that way.
Just by bluffing.
Yeah, and talking, I mean, literally, I know it's a cliche, talking the talk. The trouble with this, of course, the wider problem with this, Matt, and this would exist regardless of Trump, is that you can't get rid of Hamas. I mean, you can blow away a few leaders and eradicate, you know, some training camps or some weapons depositories, but you can't kill or bomb an ideology.
That's true, yeah. I'm not. Also, he is a real estate guy, so it's not beyond the realms of possibility.
Well, indeed, he knows what bits of where people said you can't build there. Watch me, I can. He's got that on his CV, good and proper, right?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we don't know what he's thinking, and that's the beauty of Trump. It may just be a way of sort of sorting the whole thing. It may be his first step in creating peace.
Yeah.
And we know from his last term that there was no sort of nothing like what we've seen under Biden's term in his term. So,
well, Biden wasn't really. He didn't have those capabilities, did he? Which is, clearly why he's no longer there. Thank goodness for that. Listen, Matt, I've got to move just for time. Thank you for that. A little bit of breaking news as well. Some of the elections, the council elections scheduled for May in 9 council areas have been postponed for a year due to plans for the reorganisation of local government in England. This is Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner confirming that elections scheduled for May in 9, not all, 9 council areas have been postponed for 1 year due to plans for reorganisation in local government. That's not going to bode well for many. Some will sniff a conspiracy, others will counter that by saying, well, no, they're still going ahead, just not in 9 areas. What's the significance? And we'll get more detail on that as it develops as well, because that is oddly a bigger story than you might imagine, particularly when you look at the political landscape right now. And parties that are likely to do rather well in local elections, and incumbents that are likely to not do so well, even though they're still technically in a honeymoon period, they never had one. People will surmise from that there's something smells a little bit off on this. 0344 499 1000. Tarquin, don't go away with you as soon as possible. Dorian in Dover says, if your guest is saying that it was a plan to destroy Gaza, then surely Hamas must be complicit as they started the destruction. Spot on. Thank you for that. We'll have more calls on this one. Can Trump really create peace in the Middle East? And Kevin Schofield is going to be joining us to talk through the big political stories, including a digest of Prime Minister's question time. Was it a belter? How did it fare? Details coming up on the other side of the news at 2 o'clock, which is next. It is 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. Lots to get through in this section. We're talking Donald Trump, of course, accused of calling for ethnic cleansing after saying he wants America to own Gaza. Yeah, he really said that. Relocate 2 million Palestinians and transform it into the Riviera of the Middle East. Welcome to Trump Towers and the Hezbollah bowling alley. I mean, that's the kind of stuff I think he wants to see going on there. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has defended a meeting with a voice coach during lockdown in the winter of 2020, saying he was working while the Tories were partying. I mean, who hasn't departed from wrapping presents on Christmas Eve to have a little voice coach lesson? It can happen to anybody. More of that as well. And the families of 3 people stabbed to death in Nottingham in 2023 have slammed the NHS as a horror show, accusing staff of failing to properly handle the killer, Valdo Colacane. We'll have more details to come. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Kevin Schofield is with us, political editor at HuffPost UK. How are you doing, Kevin?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Do you know, I just realised, just before the news, I just called you Kev rather than Kevin. I said...
Well, you know, we've known each other a while now.
I said, here we go, Kev. Yeah, but it's what occurred to me, you know, you might be a non-Kev person.
I mean, I'm
trying to think, there's somebody I know who's a non... who is it that refuses the shortened version, even though the shortened version is like completely common and wonderful?
Yeah, no, it doesn't bother me.
Does it not bother you?
Well, I feel like I've known you long enough now. It's when people who don't know me at all call me Kev.
100%.
And I think
that's weird. That's weird, yeah.
That's weird. Yeah. But yeah, no, you're allowed to call me Kev.
That's good. The big K is with us in the studio.
Now you've gone too far.
I've gone too far, yeah. Kevin is, of course, the political editor at HuffPost UK. I mean, let's talk about PMQs first. There's a few things to get into here. I mean, tell us about the main battle between Kemi and Keir. What was that about today, and who got the better of the other?
Yeah, so she did another one of these sort of feints today. She started off, it looked like she was going to go on Chagos, because she referred to Chagos, the Chagos deal, and controversy over that at the very beginning. But even before the end of that question, she'd veered off to start talking about the Rosebank oil field, which is less in the news. It's an oil field up in the North Sea, which the government, it's in their gift now, really, whether to go ahead and drill. Now, obviously, Labour said in their manifesto they would approve no more new licences. They would let the existing licences expire and no new licences. But because of the whole push for growth, the question is, will they actually go ahead and allow drilling to take place here? But it is a little bit esoteric. It's not incredibly exciting. And I think, again, Tory MPs were left scratching their heads a little bit, thinking, well, why don't you stick to Chagos? You know, they've kind of got them on the ropes a little bit on that one. Or even talk about the voice coach, perhaps. You know,
I mean, did she not mention the voice coach at all?
She didn't mention the voice coach at all. Well, she mentioned it in passing as a sort of little joke, but she didn't ask a question on it.
I mean, I would have thought that would have been a good one to go on, because obviously, you know, it's famous. She's not going to. He's obviously going to come back and say, while we were working, you were partying, you lot, and Boris Johnson. So obviously that's probably tricky territory for her. But I think that was still worth the punt. Because she could say, well, I wasn't fined for anything, I didn't do anything wrong.
Exactly, yeah.
You were having a voice lesson on Christmas Eve.
Absolutely. And
seriously? Somebody came up from Brighton on Christmas Eve to your house?
I think a lot of people probably aren't aware of the details and would be like, that is bizarre.
That's totally bizarre.
And I think the further we get on from Partygate, the less of a political attack line or potent political attack line it is for the Labour Party.
True.
But yeah, she stuck with that. She started talking about AstraZeneca, who announced last week they were pulling out of a deal to invest in Britain and create lots of jobs, which is fair enough. But I just felt like she missed the mark a little bit, and he was well prepared on the Chagos Islands. He sort of ignored the question on the oil field and went and answered a question which she didn't ask on Chagos, because he felt that he had her on the ropes.
Well, we were speaking to Isabel Oakeshott a little earlier on that, and she felt that she felt quite patronised by Starmer's kind of response that, well, you know, if you knew what I knew, this is why we've got to do it.
Yeah, I mean...
Is he harbouring a kind of, just security kind of blanket on this one in order to say, well, there's reasons we've got to do this, but I can't tell you?
Well, the point he made...
And Kemi knows as well.
Well, exactly. The point he made was that the security advice that he has seen she could see it as well. He says that once she became leader of the opposition, he said to her, look, if there's anything you want security advice on, if there's any piece of security briefing that you would like the detail of, absolutely.
Because she has that clearance too.
She does, yeah, absolutely. Because that enables her to ask questions on it, and it's important that the leader of the opposition knows what is the advice that the Prime Minister's getting in a lot of occasions. But the point he made was, you've chosen not to. On Chagos, you know, if you had taken me up on the offer of a briefing on it, you would know exactly the same security advice that I've had. Now, then you can get into a debate over, right, fair enough, but is the deal you're signing up to still a good deal for Britain, regardless of that national security advice? But I think if she has, for whatever reason, chosen not to find out what that advice is herself, then that does leave her on a bit of a sticky wicket.
Yeah, that's tricky, and it's interesting. Farage put was it an urgent question he put in today?
Yeah.
And of course he went down, and that was, again, you know, whether you support Reform UK, whether you hate Reform UK, in terms of, you know, 5 blokes making a massive impact, way above the... Even when Farage stood up, there was some pantomime around that because he was getting heckled a little bit. The Speaker had to intervene.
Which I don't think will do him any harm.
None whatsoever.
Because he is the anti-establishment guy. You know, these are the Labour and Tories, they've let you down.
100%.
So they're shouting at him. It's like, all you're doing is making the point for him.
You're absolutely... Yeah, this is the greatest PR machine at that moment for Reform and for Nigel Farage. And then, of course, he asked a question which involved the winter fuel allowance. And you think, that's what Kemi should have done, or something like that, because people, that resonates, and people go, yeah, that's exactly what I want to hear.
Absolutely, it's the type of thing that people are actually talking about, and it's a thing, which was interesting, actually. He completely ignored that question. He answered, he had a pop at Nigel Farage over Clacton, you know, obviously a pre-prepared gag, but he completely body swerved the winter fuel allowance stuff.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, again, it's something that you can see being clipped up by Reform and used on social media to their advantage, and there was nothing really in what Kemi Badenoch had that I think is going to work for her in the same way.
Just a final point on the voice coach. Of course, Keir Starmer was... I mean, if it turned out, and I think I don't know if anybody has reported this to the police, there's got to be some, Guido or somebody must have surely rang the police and I'd like to report a crime.
I think that'll be the next
because
thing,
the police obviously can't do anything until somebody reports it. If it turns out there's been a breach, the smart money says it will be the voice coach that breached. But surely if you have somebody to your house, are you not a co-conspirator of the breach? I don't know. But if he got a fine, he's got to resign, because he told us he's going to resign.
He would undoubtedly, after everything that he threw at Boris Johnson
if
and Rishi
he was
Sunak,
literally taken down by a voice coach.
It would be hilarious in many ways. It's not going to happen, but it would be astonishing. You know, the irony of the guy who's supposed to be Mr. Rules and who absolutely and rightly hammered the Tories over Partygate being brought down. As I say, it won't happen. The line that the Labour were saying afterwards was basically, and again, I'm not sure it stacks up that well really, but on that day he was actually working, he was going through, it was all about the Brexit deal on Christmas Eve that year. The voice coach was part of the core team inside Labour HQ. She had to come in to prepare him for a press conference and speech that he was doing on Zoom, obviously, because no one could come to watch him make the speech. But again, there is just still questions lingering. Did she really need to be there in person? Could she not have given this advice or this help coaching via Zoom at that time? Like, we all had to work that way at that time.
But of course, it also... there's maybe another issue here, and it depends whether it sticks for the entirety of his tenure at number 10, but that is the kind of... the image of the Prime Minister, the fact that, you know, first we had, you know, Keir walking around in, you know, about 80 grand's worth of Armani suit when he'd previously, you know, gone to River Island or whatever it was. So there was that, and then there's, you know, Starmer had a voice coach, which in itself to many people is quite funny, and I know the Telegraph and others have been putting the sort of pre-voice coach voice out there versus the new. And there's not really any difference between them.
I haven't noticed any difference.
Nobody ever said, have you heard Starmer lately? He's sounding brilliant. That never happened, did it?
It's not like Margaret Thatcher.
Yes.
She employed and everyone, it was so obvious. Look at what she sounded like before. to afterwards.
Yeah.
The voice coach really worked.
And
obviously.
Thatcher kind of had like very different reasons. There was a sort of little bit of a sexist thing going on.
Totally.
She needed to sound a bit harder because she was being, even on her own side. Half the people on her backbench didn't think she was going to win.
No, exactly.
How could all these old landowning gentry characters? Really, we're putting a woman into bat. That's never happened. Oh well, let her give it a go. She'll be gone by Wednesday.
Yeah.
And of course she won and won big. But so I think she had different reasons. Keir's, we will wait to be seen, but it feeds into this sort of haplessness that there's a danger that Starmer is kind of filling those clothes rather well.
Yeah, you're right. It's just another embarrassment, really. I mean, you mentioned the suits and the glasses. Obviously, that was a bad one. That was very early on in him being Prime Minister, and he just seems to be dogged by these types of missteps all the way along. Even something that happened way back, over 4 years ago, has still come back to haunt him. And you're right, there is a sort of humorous element to it, the whole, because it's a voice coach, there's something a bit sort of daft about it, really.
Indeed. What about this story as well? It's worth just mentioning this. As we heard in the last hour or so that some of the elections scheduled for May, the local elections, have been delayed. We're talking East Sussex, West Sussex, Essex, Thurrock, Hampshire, Norfolk, Suffolk, Surrey and the Isle of Wight. That's not all the local elections, but it's that lot, while the government postponed for a year to reorganise local government. What is meant by that? This is Angela Rayner's department, by the way.
Yeah, so they're making councils sort of merge, really, to become sort of unitary authorities. So they're saying, well, there's no point having an election now if basically the council isn't going to exist in 12 months' time.
Yes.
So there is a logic to it. But again, I think this is something that will play right into Reform's hands. You look at
100%.
all the names, Thurrock, Essex, all these places, you would think would be quite strong Reform territory potentially in May. If you look at the opinion polls, there's one from YouGov this week that put Reform in the lead. There's a very good chance that they would give Labour and the Tories a bloody nose.
Correct.
But they're not obviously going to have the opportunity to do that. Now, as I say, there might well be practical reasons for delaying the elections, but to your ordinary punter in the street, and I think this will be the message that Reform really want to hammer in, they'll be saying they're denying you a voice. They're not giving 100%. You a chance to register your unhappiness with that.
And they've chosen to do it now right as the momentum is behind Reform.
Absolutely.
And Labour aren't exactly having a tickety-boo time in government, so it will be seen like that. But all the other elections will go ahead, right?
Yeah,
it's
all
just
the other ones
these
will go
9
ahead.
areas.
And these ones, I think, have been postponed by a year, so they will happen eventually, but just not when they were supposed to happen.
It's on that point, a group of Labour MPs urging Number 10 to get tougher on migration, and of course these are really Labour MPs that are in those red wall seats that stand to lose those exactly in the same way that the Tories took over Labour, and then Labour get back in, and now Reform are set to take over Labour. So it's history kind of potentially repeating itself, and these are various MPs in those areas that are mindful that if the government don't get tougher on immigration, they'll be gone.
Absolutely, and I remember there was the Tory red wall group of MPs as well who were saying the same messages. You've got to get tougher on immigration. They were saying that to Rishi Sunak at the time, and you've got to spend more money up here. Remember, obviously Boris Johnson talking about levelling up those red wall, which kind of won him a lot of those seats in 2019.
100%.
And the Tory MPs were very worried that he hadn't made good on that promise. They saw what happened at the last election, and now those same Labour MPs, you're right, are making the same noises because they are looking over their shoulders and they're looking at their majorities and thinking, well, these opinion polls, if they'd repeated anything like it come the election, then I'm in a lot of trouble. But the problem there, obviously, for Labour is if they go harder on immigration, then they're going to start getting attacked on the left, from their left flank and left-wing MPs and more left-of-centre MPs. So, it's a very difficult one.
Do you think are Labour just sort of banking on the fact, there was this sort of word on the street when they first came in and made a lot of announcements that were a little unpopular, winter fuel being the obvious one, is the theory was, look, they're getting all the bad stuff out of the way, and then, give it a year's time, the economy's grown, interest rates are down, employment's looking good, everyone would have forgotten this stuff. Is that still part of their thinking?
That was definitely the thinking, undoubtedly. You see, got all the bad stuff out of the way, and then, people will either have forgotten about it come the next election, or things will be so good in other areas that it'll become less of an issue. I think the longer it goes on, with the economy being sluggish, missteps left, right and centre. All it does is just add to this feeling that they're hapless, they're incompetent, they're just not very good. And it could really backfire on them. So it was a gamble that they made. Right now it doesn't look like the gamble's paying off. One thing I will say though is obviously the next election is still another 4 years away, so who's to say where we'll be in 4 years'
Well,
time.
if everybody's got, you know, kind of back to the heydays of, we got loads of money, everything's fantastic, you know, life's good, and don't worry about it.
At the moment,
winter fuel, winter schmool here, we don't care, life's brilliant, we're all on holiday down on the Costa, you know, everything's good.
Homes,
just a quick one, is the Downing Street cat still there?
Larry is still hanging in there,
Right.
Yeah. Must be a good age now, right enough, but yeah.
He's been there like 500 years. Are you aware of Palmerston, the Foreign Office cat?
Yeah, and they don't get on. Larry and Palmerston.
They only talk through their people.
Yeah.
Never.
It's like Blair and Brown all over again.
It's exactly that. But the Palmerston cat, Palmerston, the former resident of the Foreign Office, has been moved, is taken a diplomatic post to Bermuda.
What?
Seriously. The cat's got a gig in Bermuda.
The cat's had that. Well, that
3,500
laugh there.
A post on Palmerston's Twitter account, I kid you not, announced the black and white rescue cat, who served as chief mouser for the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office between 2016 and 2020, has been moved to British Overseas Territory as feline relations consultant.
Oh, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
So the best job in government.
Don't tell Larry, he'll be raging.
Oh, Larry would be fuming. Why didn't they get the gig? I don't know why he speaks in that language. I've got no idea. He's got a little cigar. It was Palmerston all along, wasn't it? There's no mice around the Foreign Office now, apparently, in solidarity.
I see.
They've refused to pest the place. Larry's got his work cut out, it seems.
Lucky old Palmerston, that sounds like quite a nice gig.
It's all right, isn't it? Yeah, he's got a hammock and everything over there. He's got, a little pina colada waiting on the side.
What if you worry about winter fuel payments over there?
I think that was part of it. I think he was going to start talking. I think he was going to start singing like a canary. Listen, Kevin, thank you. Kevin Schofield, political editor at HuffPost UK, with us on the programme. 0344 499 1000. Back to you with more comment coming next on Talk.
full-length runway in Britain was built in the 1940s. No progress in 80 years. A third runway could increase potential GDP by 0.43% by 2050.
Could a new runway be built that abides with carbon targets, concerns around noise pollution and concerns around air pollution?
That a third runway at Heathrow would unlock further growth, boost investments, increase exports, and make the UK more open and more connected.
This one from Jenny in Oxfordshire, who says, Ian, as far as I remember, there were no parties on the 24th in Miss Gray's report. So Keir is wrong to say that while his voice coach was around, the Tories were partying. They were not. I'm not going to defend Keir Starmer, Jenny. I think he's talking about generally they partied, we worked. But you're right. I mean, the only parties that were going on then were people's family Christmas. It's Christmas Eve. And the voice coach turned up. Najib says, on the issue of the US takeover of Gaza, as a person who lives in the Middle East, Jordan, right next door to Israel, I would honestly prefer to live under Western occupation any day of the week. Imagine somewhere civilized in a chaotic neighbourhood where you're allowed to vote, say what's on your mind, access to schools, universities, hospitals, and live longer than 80 years. Israel all the way, he says. Thank you for that. This one in from Liam. I do wonder, the delayed local elections, are they in areas that could go to reform? Well, I mean, I'll let you decide on that one, bearing in mind the areas we are talking about are Hampshire, East Thurrock, West Sussex, Essex, Suffolk. So, yeah, absolutely, they are. But there's no rat to smell, apparently, Liam. None whatsoever. Dave is in London on Gaza. Dave, what have you got for us? Hi.
Hi, Ian. Yeah. Oh, just quickly on the Starmer and the parties. I agree. There's no way Labour were having any parties because I don't think you could ever describe being with Labour people as a party, right?
True.
It would
true.
It would just be a gathering. In terms of the
Thought it would be.
of Gaza,
yes.
Yeah, I was just listening to your last guest, and you just get the feeling that although there was some sort of give and acknowledgement there that this is just never going to get resolved. And Trump wasn't saying I fancy taking over Gaza. I watched his whole commentary, and he was just kind of saying, you know, it's a demolition site. It's just going to stay like it forever. Maybe there's another way of doing it.
So when he said we will own Gaza, you don't think he was saying literally?
No. I think he was I think what he's reaching out to is to see if some of the other Arabic nations that have started to move in a more, let's call it a Western direction, but just in a more like, you know, Dubai. I mean, all the people that are leaving the UK to go and live in Dubai, I bump into one every day now. And so I think he's he's hoping that some of those more moderate nations, but I don't see how they get out of it, because at the end of the day, they're prisoners of God. So they all go up to Abraham and Sarah, both the Jews and the Arabs. You know, what did they have? They couldn't have kids, Abraham and Sarah, so they had Ishmael. Then God decided they could have kids, so they had Jacob and Isaac from memory, and Ishmael was banished, and that became the Arabs and the nomadic tribes, and Jacob and Isaac became the favoured sons. So there's no way out of it. It all goes back to Bethlehem at the end of the day.
And there's the issue. You know, earlier on, I think it was Gary that made the point that could you not just set up Israel somewhere else, like in the middle of America? But of course, the geography is significant, right? It's not just having your own space.
Yeah, well, I mean, the birth of Christ was in Bethlehem, and Muhammad, I think, went up to heaven on his horse in 650 AD from the same place. So
there you go.
Seems quite a coincidence they were all hanging about in the same place back in the day, I guess. But that's it. It all goes back to there.
Yeah, indeed. Good point. Dave, thank you very much indeed. That's Dave in... I was about to say Dave in Gaza. Dave in London. This one from Dave in Oxford, who says, let's get this right. Starmer asked a voice coach to travel 65 miles from Brighton to London on Christmas Eve. So obviously the lesson was done with both wearing masks, as the rules stated. Yes? So how the hell do you do a voice coaching lesson both masked up? Either that or the rules were relaxed and no masks were worn, in which case rules were broken, yeah? If that's the case, Starmer was obviously being extremely irresponsible towards his wife and his children. Yes, says Dave in Oxford. Yeah, that may well be true. It does seem a little bit fishy to me. It seems a little bit odd that we are awaiting a situation where clarity is needed from the government or the whoever can remember the kind of micro details of what the rules was on that specific day. 2020, we were in the tier system, tier 3, tier 4, tier 2. There was all of that sort of shenanigans going on. It seems to me that without checking the full extent of what the rules were between Brighton, because that's where the voice coach came from, and London, that there were rules in place. There were still rules in place. We had a tier system. So, and the tier system, I think I'm right, it's when my in-laws were due to come up, we cancelled Christmas dinner, basically. Cancelled Christmas dinner because of the tier system. Now, you might say, well, it's a bit bonkers, the tier. Well, we know that, but that was the rule. So if you breached the tier system, you were breaching the rules. So a voice coach turning up at your house would surely breach the rule. Would that, I'm struggling to see why it is more complicated than that. But let's be generous to Keir Starmer. Let's say you could meet up with, you know, I don't know, do you remember you could meet up with your bubble, they called it, which was largely your family or people in your bubble. And then you had a work bubble as well, didn't you? So you could work with people and you could have a cup of tea together. If you had a beer together, that was seen as a party, but you could have a cup of tea together because you work in the same office, even though you were 2 meters apart. So let's assume that the laws were, or the rules were a little more relaxed at that point. I would still think that the leader of the opposition would have gone, do you know what? It's kind of within the rules, but it doesn't look good to have a voice coach. Not a doctor. You know, if your doctor turned out because you had to have iron injections or something once a week and turned up for a couple of shots from the medic, you kind of get that. A voice coach? So I'm not absolutely sure. I cannot imagine a way that Keir Starmer is going to, or anyone else for that matter, when it's the specifics of the rules of the day were established. Somebody might be able to call us, by the way, and say, OK, was it Christmas 2020, wasn't it? What were the specific rules at that time? So it wasn't lockdown in the bigger sense. Was it locked? Was it the tier system? What was going on at that time? If you can remember, it's not that hard to research, by the way, but I'm throwing it to you as part of this show. What was specifically happening on Christmas Eve when Keir Starmer invited a voice coach to travel from Brighton to make him sound better? And on all levels, that just seems a bit iffy. And by the way, I don't want him fined for that, no more than I would want somebody who was fined for going on a walk, like their daily exercise, but they were told they were socialising because there were 2 of them and they had a mug of tea in their hand or something like that. The craziness of, you know, whatever else happened at Downing Street. And Downing Street, there were clear occasions of absolute breaches of the, yeah, that's bad too. Boris Johnson getting a bit of Colin the Caterpillar cake. Not absolutely sure that that constitutes breaking the rules, does it? So this is what we've got here. December 2020, during the UK's Tier 4 lockdown, London was under strict stay-at-home orders with exceptions for essential workers and key workers. The government guidelines specified that individuals should work from home unless they were unable to. Key workers were defined as those whose jobs were vital to public health and safety, including sectors like healthcare, education and emergency services. Voice coaches were not listed among the essential occupations. So I think Keir Starmer had a speech coming up or something, so I get it. He's allowed to go to work. People were allowed to work. If you couldn't work from home, if you're the leader of the opposition, like any other leader of a party, you'd be allowed to go to work. I'm not sure getting your voice coach round for a bit of a powwow in the vocal department quite cuts it. So where this story is going to go, the police are going to get involved, aren't they? Someone's going to call the police if they haven't done already. My money's on Guido Fawkes, who will probably have made a phone call already saying we'd like to report what we believe to be a breach of the rules. It's retrospective, but don't worry, it's only the Prime Minister of the day. Please investigate. They'll come back and they'll say no rules were broken, or rules were broken. Starmer was very specific. He said if he gets issued with a fine, he would resign. If he gets issued with a fine. So he could have been accused, he could still be accused of breaking the rules, but if he doesn't get a fine, he hasn't got to resign. But it will still be a terrible look. Oh boy, will it be a terrible look. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. More to come from you on Talk, coming next. It is Talk 25 to 2. Back with more calls and comments from you coming shortly. Now, the families of 3 people stabbed to death in Nottingham in 2023 have slammed the NHS as a, quote, horror show, accusing staff of failing to do their jobs properly. Valdo Collicane is serving an indefinite hospital order for manslaughter with diminished responsibilities. You may remember those high-profile killings did not come under the category of murder due to the clinical diagnosis of the perpetrator. But a review has found he was allowed to skip schizophrenia medication because of his fear of needles. Let's speak with Dr. Raj Basood, consultant psychiatrist and, of course, known broadcaster to all of us. Raj, good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon.
Nice to have you with us. I mean, this is a disturbing case. All of these cases are disturbing. This is your area, your territory, psychiatry. You know it well. Can you imagine, when you heard the headlines of what has happened here, did this story seem all too and horrifically familiar to you? Is this something that happens, albeit not always with consequences like this?
Well, I've worked as a consultant psychiatrist for several decades in the NHS, and one of the reasons I left the NHS was I became too frightened about how dangerous clinical practice in the NHS had become. So that's why I moved into independent practice. To be frank, and it's a terrible thing to have to say, I was horrified by this story, but in a way I was surprised that it doesn't happen more often. Yeah. This report has slammed the NHS, but actually this report is a whitewash because things are even worse, speaking as a clinical practitioner, than this report has described. For example, the report goes on about the man who's suffering from paranoid schizophrenia who ended up killing 3 people, that he was suffering from paranoid schizophrenia, and he had a care coordinator, and the care coordinator did this, and the care coordinator did that, or didn't do this or that. And I've dealt with these care coordinators for many decades in the NHS, and I have no idea what a care coordinator is. I have no idea what the qualifications are they're meant to have. Back in the day, in the old days, when you were very seriously ill, you went to a thing called a hospital, remember that? Yeah. And you saw people called doctors and nurses. Throughout this report, this man didn't end up actually seeing doctors and nurses, it seems largely speaking. It was these care coordinators, which are names, euphemisms like physician associate, to disguise the fact you don't end up seeing a clinician, a proper clinician with proper qualifications, because that's too expensive. What you end up seeing are people who are poorly qualified, they make terrible decisions, and people die as a result. And it will happen again and again, because the fundamental problems are not being properly identified, I'm afraid to tell you.
Do you sense, Raj, that this is down to, I mean, ultimately, if Wes Streeting was sitting here, he would say, well, it's down to money, isn't it? You know, we haven't got enough psychiatrists, we haven't got enough doctors that are specialising or even beginning to specialise in this field. That's the root of the issue here. Is it as simple as that?
No, it's not as simple as that. Yes, the system is overwhelmed, there's not enough money, but it's also very poorly planned, it's very disorganized, and it's full of stupidity. So, for example, this man, if you look at the report, was moved from pillar to post in terms of different teams looking after him, right? Now, back in the day when I first started off in the NHS as a psychiatrist, I would look after patients in the outpatient department. If they needed admitting to the hospital, I would look after them in the inpatient department. There was a thing called continuity of care. Now you've got different teams. You've got teams that deal with people who are outpatients, a completely separate team that deals with them if they come into hospital. Then they get passed backwards and forwards between all sorts of different teams. And as a result, communication breaks down. There's a poor information transfer. All the reports keep saying the same thing, but that fundamental organizational stupidity of neglecting the idea that what patients need is a clinician, and a clinician that stays constant year after year, who knows the patient, who has information about the patient in their heads, cares about that particular individual, and a relationship develops. The NHS has forgotten that at the heart of medicine is a relationship between a doctor and a patient. So it's very poorly organized, and it's organized stupidly. And that's one of the reasons these tragedies happen. It's not just about money.
What is the issue, and as a psychiatrist of many, many years of expertise, and you know, top of your game in this area, you would have dealt with patients who are, you know, potentially very, very dangerous and in circumstances, and without the right medication could go on to do something horrific. That's clearly what happened here. This man didn't like needles, so he didn't get his medication. Is that where it stops? The patient who is quite clearly diagnosed as schizophrenic says, I don't like needles, so therefore I can't have the medication. Everyone goes, OK, no problem, sir, off you go. I mean, I'm perhaps making it sound cruder than it was, or perhaps it was like that.
Well, it's really, really tragic, isn't it? It's so silly, it's almost comedic if it wasn't so tragic. Yeah. The reality is this man was dangerous. Well, the first time he got discharged from hospital, he went back and tried to break into the neighbour's flat, and she was so frightened, she jumped out of a window and injured herself. So there's lots of clues that this man was dangerous. Yeah. The law under the Mental Health Act allows for the fact that if someone is dangerous, that you can inject them. You can inject them for their own safety and the safety of society at large. What happened here was very poor thinking and poor management by poorly qualified staff. And that is one of the fundamental issues. Paranoid schizophrenia, 1% of the population suffer from it. It's a very common psychotic disorder. And the double tragedy here is with the right treatment, people suffering from paranoid schizophrenia can return to normal functioning in society. It's completely remediable as a disorder. It's completely treatable. But what happens again and again, this man was sectioned under the Mental Health Act 4 times. Yeah. I mean, by the second or third time, did it not click that their treatment was not working? And their treatment wasn't working because they weren't being assertive enough. You need to be assertive. The Mental Health Act allows you to do that if people are dangerous, and he was clearly dangerous.
Yeah, and that would have been, in circumstances such as that, if you have to force an injection onto somebody, that it clearly involves a physical restraint of some kind. I guess that is something most clinicians and those that work around clinicians would resist and would be a last resort. But it does happen, you're saying, from time to time.
Absolutely, and the law under the Mental Health Act it's there that it allows it to happen, and it has to happen under the law, because if you don't do that, then really bad things happen. What happens is the law has to be implemented by staff who understand the law, and I met many people who were not clinicians running around trying to manage these patients who didn't understand the Mental Health Act, and as a result didn't realize that actually you can implement it. Now, it's not pleasant, but I'll tell you another thing. Once you've done it once, the patient doesn't resist a second or third time because they see that as pointless. Okay, so again, clinical experience tells you only got to do it once, and then generally speaking, the patient accepts it. And as they get better and better with the injection, they come to value having the injection. So, you know, again, what happened here was absolutely ridiculous, and it will repeat. There'll be other episodes, terrible tragedies, terrible killings like this. It will happen again, I'm afraid to say.
Yeah, there's lots we also don't know about this case due to data protection as well. Some might say that if you are a triple killer, that you, I don't know, surrender a certain right to data protection, perhaps for the public good and perhaps for other forms of information. Is that an area that is important to pursue?
Well, there is doctor-patient confidentiality. I mean, there are lots of problems here. There's a sense of a conflict between the rights of the patient, in this case, and the rights of society to be protected from dangerous patients. And certainly what this report has highlighted, and the family have slammed the NHS, and I believe the report still hasn't actually lifted the veil on how really bad things are. What's happening is, I think the public are losing confidence in the idea that the professions and the management of the politicians are running a system that actually protects the public, because they're not. That's the trouble.
And for the family, the families of the victims, the bereaved families and friends, who are told essentially that they can't really have the details of the full report because of data protection. I mean, that seems all shades of wrong, frankly.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I agree that when these tragedies happen, we've got to try and learn, and we've got to try and prevent them happening. And the family have slammed NHS care. I happen to notice, and I could have got this wrong, but no one's got the sack. You know, no one gets the sack.
Do they ever, Raj? Does anyone ever get the sack in these kind of extraordinary industrial-scale blunders, whether it's children and social services and paedophile rings, goodness knows what else? No one seems to lose their job.
I know. It's absolutely stunning, and I saw that again and again. I saw at first hand, working at the coalface of NHS medicine, that particular problem, that people didn't have to carry any responsibility for their decisions. And as a result, that's another reason why things repeat again and again.
Indeed. Raj, listen, great to have you on, sir. We will speak again. Dr. Raj Persaud, consultant psychiatrist and broadcaster, on the beyond disturbing story of Valdo Calocane. And like so many of these stories, I mean, as if it wasn't bad enough, the brutal killings of three people, two young people, a guy about to, I think, a week away from retirement or something of that order. Just absolutely horrific. What then compounds the horror, of course, is when you discover that some things could potentially have been prevented. It might have been possible for people to step in. It could have been possible that the authorities, the mental health services, were a little bit more on it. We hear that this man didn't like needles, and as a result of that, he wasn't given his medication. We know that when he was given his medication, it did work. It did what it was meant to do. What's going on there? The system is wrong, said the review. Poor communication, missed opportunities, families not being listened to. This is of no consolation to the families of Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley Kumar and Ian Coates, who were all stabbed to death back in June 2023. And no one has walked the plank? Does anyone ever walk the plank? They don't even get to see the full extent of this because of data protection, which protects the killer because he still has human rights that he's able to retain despite his status as a convicted killer. It was manslaughter with diminished responsibilities that he was eventually found guilty of because of his mental health state. But there was a catalogue of errors and blunders within the NHS and with the associated services that were meant to be treating this man. And guess what he did? Guess what? And you wouldn't believe that a man diagnosed with schizophrenia and all manner of other mental health issues didn't take his drugs, and he went out and killed 3 people, something that we, I think, can probably surmise was always a threat if he didn't take his drugs. No one walks the plank. So to compound where I began, to compound the horror and the misery and the desperate, bereaved families, the mourning families who will never get over this, you're then told, well, you're not allowed to know everything that happened. And by the way, the bit that you do know, we could have probably prevented some of it happening. In fact, we could have maybe prevented it all happening if we'd given the bloke his medication. Is it that simple? If you work in mental health services, maybe you can shine a light. I'm being a bit black and white on this, but I think it was broadly echoed by Raj Persaud, the psychiatrist we just spoke with. 0344 499 1000.
Government borrowing costs hit a 27-year high, and the pound is taking a pounding. Gloomy economic data is expected to show inflation and growth are off course.
Let me ask again, and can you please be clear? Will Rachel Reeves be your Chancellor for the duration of this parliament?
Rachel Reeves is doing a fantastic job. She has my full confidence, and she has the full confidence of the entire party.
Can Rachel Reeves hold on as Chancellor?
Stuart says, regarding Callacane, when the institutions were closed and care in the community became the new way, people predicted murders would happen and they were ignored. This case is just one example of many, unfortunately. Protecting the public seems to be less important than saving money. And, of course, thank you, Stuart, for that. Just to make that even worse, mental health issues have quadrupled, well, beyond quadrupled in that time as well. So the resources, in some respect, some would say that there's more resources than there used to be, but there are many more cases than there used to be. How do you deal with the unknown, perhaps? Keith's in Shropshire. What have you got for us? Keith, good afternoon to you.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Hi.
I've just been listening to the various contributions regarding Gaza and Donald Trump.
Yep.
I lived out in the Middle East for 40 years in Dubai from 1977 to 2016.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of Palestinians who were stateless living in Dubai. I became quite friendly with one particular man. Met him through playing football in the Dubai Expatriate League. This chap worked for the BMW dealership. And on one occasion, I was in the dealership, and he came running over to me and gave me a big hug. And he said, "Keith, I'm going home." So I said to him, "Look, I'm really, really pleased for you." Left it at that, but as we know, it never happened.
Yeah.
And the reason it never happened is because he was referring to the 1993 Oslo Accords, which were signed by Begin and Arafat. And what transpired was that Arafat refused to go through with it all. And the reason he refused to go through it all was because he said the Palestinian people didn't want it, and if he had agreed to it, they would have killed him.
We will never know.
Well, we'll never know, but nothing's changed.
No, absolutely. Nothing has changed. You know, there's little bits of tinkering around the edges, aren't there, on these kind of stories? Once in a while there's a scintilla of light, Keith, as you know, and then before you know it, it's exactly back to where it was, and that's kind of where we are again.
Yeah, and Trump's saying what he's going to do.
Yeah.
It's never going to happen while Hamas are there. Because they control the people in Gaza, and there's the same problem in the West Bank with a different organisation. And until they can get rid of Hamas, nothing is going to change.
And even if people... look, there will be supporters of Hamas, of course, but even if Palestinians wanted to say, OK, I'm going to rebuild a new life, I'm going to go elsewhere, I'm going to go to Egypt, I'm going to go to Jordan... even if they wanted to do that, I mean, can those countries withstand... what, 2 million plus people?
Well, they won't take them for a start.
Firstly, yeah, they don't want to, but even if they could...
They don't want them. And the foreign minister of Dubai, in 2017, he actually warned the West. He said, "You're making a big mistake accepting all these people. Yeah. We won't, and we don't have any trouble in our country." And that's the state in most of the Gulf states. They won't take any of them.
Yeah. I'm bound to ask why you're with us, Keith. What made you leg it from Dubai back to Blighty? I'm reminded that it's about 27 degrees there right now, and it's about 3 degrees in Shropshire.
Well, to be quite frank, I'm actually thinking of going back now because I can't stand... the way this country's going. I came back in 2016, retired, and at the time in Dubai, it was very difficult to stay if you haven't got a job and you're not working there.
Yeah.
They've changed that now, and I'm now investigating. In fact, my former wife and I are both thinking of going back there, and she's going out in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah.
And she's going to go have a look round to see what accommodation.
It's not the cheapest place to live, though, Keith, right?
It's not in Dubai, and what we've actually done is moved a little bit north out of Dubai to Ras Al Khaimah, which is about 100 kilometres north of Dubai. and it is a really, really nice place. And it's a bit like old Dubai used to be.
Yeah.
Dubai's too crowded now. It's just hectic.
Yeah, it's a whole different ballgame, isn't it? And it's very safe, of course, and that's key to anyone's existence, right?
It's relatively safe. I never had any problems in 40 years.
Yeah.
And to be quite frank, the police there are brilliant.
Yeah. I keep hearing this. Listen, Keith, thank you. Good luck with whatever decision you choose to make on that one. But I can see why people would want to leg it. I mean, if for no other reason, a nice bit of weather. Do you ever get that envy thing, time zone envy, where, as you said here now, there are people dipping their toes into a pool where it's about, 30-odd degrees. I know it's winter, and I quite like winter. I like crisp winters in the UK. We've got the Voice of Doom here. If you're hanging on, don't go away, Lizzie and others. Voice of Doom, this is the political mystery voice bit. It's day 4, I think I'm right in saying. Day 4 of the mystery voice. Who is this?
Things that were mistakes.
Don't call in because there ain't no prize, but you can message in 87222 if you want to have a crack at that. Here it is again.
Things that were mistakes.
And as I always seem to say, it sounds like I'm reading this, doesn't it? If we get a right answer, we'll give you all, or reveal all on the other side of the news. If we don't, it rolls over to tomorrow. Here's the voice again.
Things that were mistakes.
Things that were mistakes. There it is. Any ideas? 87222 if you think you know. Lizzie is in Yorkshire. Lizzie, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Ian. I've been listening to quite a bit of the talk regarding the tragedy at Nottingham.
Yeah.
And I personally, not me personally, but I've been involved quite heavily with regard to a severe mental health issue with a member of the family.
Okay.
Now, what I can't understand from my knowledge and the experience I've been through is, where was the community treatment order?
Mm-hmm.
Why was there no community treatment order in place? Because what that does is, if somebody goes back into the community and they've been under the mental health and hospital and they won't take or can't take their medications, then they get taken back into hospital until they do. Now, nobody seems to have mentioned this anymore, and my family member was successively put on a community treatment order every 6 months, every year.
And that is for people whose condition clearly needs to be monitored.
Correct. So if they don't take their medication, and I know about depots, it's generally haloperidol, which is the drug that they use, because it can be given as a depot once a week, once every couple of weeks, depending on the strength and severity.
Sure.
But if that person doesn't take their treatment, then they get taken back into the hospital. And for me, I kept wanting to fight for that.
Yeah.
And it did keep getting put in place. But I gave permission for my family member to be restrained until they had it.
Yeah, there seems in this case to be absolutely none of that in place. Listen, Lizzie, I have to cut in just because the news is on, but thank you for highlighting that issue and the obvious comparisons with available treatment that was shortcoming, non-existent in many respects. Here's the Voice of Doom.
Things that were mistakes.
Who's that? We might reveal all on the other side of the news headlines at 3 if we get a right answer. This is Talk. Yeah, welcome back. 3 minutes after 3 o'clock, right here at the home of Common Sense on Talk. We are, of course, talking US President Donald Trump. He's been accused of calling for ethnic cleansing. I don't quite think that's what he meant. After saying he wants America to own Gaza, relocate 2 million Palestinians and transform it to the Riviera of the Middle East. What did he mean by that? Can he do it, and would it have any support? It doesn't look like it at the moment, but is he merely shaking things up to try and get a solution of some kind? Also this afternoon, Labour MPs facing threats from Reform UK have urged Keir Starmer to toughen his stance on migration after a probe found that £100 million was wasted by the Home Office on housing asylum seekers. And of course, we brought you that story just yesterday of the extraordinary things that were being used to assist or educate those being housed in hotels, like circus lessons and yoga classes. Man alive. And Health Secretary Wes Streeting has attacked the NHS's diversity schemes, accusing staff of boasting about their anti-whiteness stance as part of a draft equality agenda, even though it's written daft equality agenda. Maybe it is a daft one. Is it meant to be daft? So he did say daft equality agenda. Well, I'm with him on that. But I'm sure the draft was just as daft as the original one after the draft. Who knows? All of that and more on the way. 0344 499 1000. So, just before we're going to speak to Anne Widdecombe in just a second on this issue of what is happening, certainly with the appetite of some Labour MPs under threat from reform. Before we do, it is the voice of doom. This is the voice we played you just before the news.
Things that were mistakes.
Do you know who that is? We obviously had a plethora of incorrect answers. Stephen Wolfe, no. I can hear that. Stephen Kinnock, no. Joe Johnson, brother of, no. Stephen Dorrell, it was not. Danny Alexander, no. Remember Danny Alexander, part of the Fab Four. Kwasi Kwarteng, no. Jack Straw, no. But we did get an answer, a correct one. Alan in Bournemouth was the first one through. William Waldegrave was the correct answer. He, of course, was, talking of health, former health secretary under Thatcher and Major. I think his time as health secretary crossed both. But he also did many other things. Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. He was chief secretary to the Treasury. He did loads of jobs in government. He was your archetypal old-fashioned Tory. Went to Eton, went to Oxford, went to Harvard. That's what you do. William Waldegrave was the right answer. Well done. Alan in Bournemouth was the first. But was he the only one, Adam, that got the right answer today? There were others. No names were left. If there's no name left, I'm afraid we have to report you to Ofcom for not playing by the rules. 0344 499 1000. Labour MPs under threat from Reform UK have formed a pressure group urging Keir Starmer to toughen his stance on migration and crime. Parliament's spending watchdog found that the Home Office wasted £100 million on housing asylum seekers. In a separate probe, it was revealed Labour councils used public funds for refugee training on hate crimes, with some offering DJ lessons and PlayStations. I'm not kidding you. Let's speak with Anne Widdecombe, former Conservative, now of Reform, and of course former Home Office Minister. Anne Widdecombe, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you.
Nice to have you with us. Do you remember at your time in the Home Office, I mean, there's never a dull day in the Home Office, of course. Do you ever remember such spectacular amounts of money being wasted? I'm sure there were some classic examples and always has been, but this is almost in another league.
Well, I mean, it's a daily feature of government that you come upon waste of some sort. But this is, as you rightly say, this is in another league. As far as I can make out, an awful lot of the wasted money was because they were looking for sites to build asylum facilities or to convert into asylum facilities. And none of the sites were suitable, but they'd already gone ahead and expended vast sums of money on them.
Yeah.
And that is just stark. Now, I was in exactly that position with the prison population when I had to find a lot of surplus accommodation, and I did look at things as they had looked at, disused military sites, etc. Didn't start buying them until I knew they were okay.
Yes. Yeah, you don't walk around with a trolley, do you, sort of just purchasing things until you've done the full analysis. And it does seem, look, I don't know, Anne, this government seems to have a PhD in doing things rather badly. I know it's never easy, I do sympathise.
To be fair, it isn't just this government. If you actually look at the report, they're also going back in time and criticising some of the Tories as well for doing exactly the same thing, just trying to do things in haste and making a total mess.
Well, I was going to come on to that. I mean, you've obviously legged it over the Rubicon. You are now part of Reform UK. Do you feel you're finally in your correct skin politically?
Yes, I absolutely do. It was a tough decision. It was back in 2019 when I left the Tories. I went to what was then the Brexit Party. And when the Brexit Party morphed into Reform, I didn't immediately join Reform. I sort of stood around and waited for the Tories to find themselves again, but they never did. And I now know that I am in a place of common sense, a place which has got priorities right, a place which listens to the public. And I'm very proud of Reform. And yes, I do feel I'm in the right place.
Yeah, I remember, I'm sure you do as well, Anne, I did the last day that the UK was in Brussels, of course.
Yes,
and
I remember.
You came on the show with me, and I've never seen somebody so happy to be losing their job as you were that day, because, of course, you were waving goodbye to the greatest labyrinthine world of the EU Parliament, and you seemed rather pleased about it. You didn't give a hoot.
I was absolutely delighted. From the very first moment I went in there, and people said, what do you hope to do? I said, I hope to make it possible to get my P45 as soon as possible. Not that the EU issues P45s, but
no.
The idea was that you go in there and get Britain out, and that's what we did.
And the reason all of this is still relevant, really, to the story we began with, and I mentioned that separate point, Labour Council spending money on refugee training to be DJs, yoga lessons, goodness knows what else, is because this is about the common sense agenda, right? Donald Trump is selling the common sense agenda. Nigel Farage and Reform sell the common sense agenda. You've always been known as somebody who's a straight talker who speaks common sense. And, most people will look at that and say, look, I'm not beyond helping somebody who's escaped a tyrannical regime. We've got a great history in that, and hopefully we continue to have one. But when it comes to circus lessons, DJ lessons and PlayStations, we are in a bonkers upside-down world.
Well, we're in a bonkers upside-down world, not only because we're doing that sort of thing, but because the people in those asylum centres haven't established a right to remain. This is what everybody's forgetting. An asylum seeker is not a refugee until he's been accepted or she's been accepted, not a refugee at all, just an asylum seeker. And that is why Reform has said clearly, anybody claiming asylum who has arrived here on a boat from a perfectly safe country will automatically have that claim refused. And so therefore you don't need to train them in circuses because they won't be staying here to perform in circuses.
Yeah, and there are very few circuses around these days, let's be honest, but that's a whole other story. Do you sense that this, particularly with Labour, but as you rightly said at the beginning, Anne, I mean, the Tories didn't do much better on this either. With Labour, it's in their DNA. I kind of get that a little bit, OK? It's in their, politically, they battle and fight from that sort of left position, either centre-left or, further to the left position. So they don't feel it, they don't sense it, they don't think it, their ideology isn't built around this stuff. So I can kind of almost understand why Yvette Cooper isn't as mobilised as you, for example. But I was always surprised that the Conservatives were so lax on this. And I look back at all those Home Secretaries, I interviewed all of them at some point, whether it was Braverman, Priti Patel, Sajid Javid, of course, was there. My goodness, I've lost count. I think even Grant Shapps did about half an hour in the Home Office, didn't he, for a period of time. There were so many. Nothing seemed to change.
No, nothing did change because nothing was put into effect. The Rwanda scheme might have proved a quite strong deterrent, but it was never effective. It didn't happen. And while it wasn't happening, they weren't doing anything else. And what we've said right from the start is you've got to stop the boats. You've got to actually stop that flow of people arriving from a perfectly safe country.
Yeah.
Stop cooperating with France. France just isn't helping. We give France money. It's not using it for the right purposes. What we've got to do is to get the boats back into French waters and say, this is your problem, France.
Yeah. That is the big issue, isn't it? That we see Yvette Cooper and the Prime Minister talking about smashing the gangs. That seems to be their mantra of the day. I almost started gnawing my own elbows every time I hear one of them use that phrase. It doesn't really mean anything. Everyone wants to smash the gangs. It's already a criminal offence. I have no doubt in believing that this is organised criminality going on. But every government in Northern Europe and elsewhere want to stop that bit. It's the coalface of the problem, isn't it? Literally the boats.
It is the boats, and that is what you've got to stop. And as I say, you make it very clear right from the get-go, you don't get asylum if you come here on a boat. And you're not going to be put in a hotel and free to come and go as you like and then to disappear at the last minute. You're actually going to be somewhere secure until you're removed. But better that you just don't arrive here at all.
Yeah.
And therefore, as I say, our first policy is to stop the boats. Now, there'll always be some that get through. We acknowledge that, and we'll deal with that. But we need to stop them. There is
some sort of bone of contention there, isn't there? I had Richard Tice on the programme a little while ago, and he outlined why there are actually legal ways that you can stop the boats. There's just that many countries don't want to explore that, but it is within the law. I think he cited even a United Nations diktat somewhere that kind of gives a green light.
Australia's done it. Belgium's done it. Now, other countries have done it. The only reason that Britain won't do it is that we haven't got the will. It's as simple as that. Until you get a reform government, you're not going to understand what it is to have a government with the will to do what it says it will do.
Finally, Anne, are you going to go back to MPing if the situation arises? I mean, you're a big voice for Reform UK. People like you in that place, it seems. But back to Parliament, have you still got the bug for that?
No. I retired from Parliament, in case anybody's forgotten, in 2010. And I only ever came back into politics because I wanted Brexit. And I wanted to get Brexit done, and now I want reform to get in. But no, being a member of Parliament is a very, very serious business. It isn't just making law. It's all the constituency work and all the rest of it. And I am, as I keep pointing out to people, 77.
77. The people of Maidstone are still missing you, Anne, I'm sure. Listen, great to have you with us. Anne Widdecombe, she is, of course, former Conservative Home Office Minister, now part of Reform UK. It's just occurred to me that when I started in radio, I think Anne Widdecombe was the first MP I ever interviewed, because it was the patch that I worked in Kent. And I remember being absolutely terrified, thinking, I've got to interview Anne Widdecombe. And of course, she was, lampooned and parodied on, every TV programme you can imagine. Famously had a bit of a spat with Michael Howard, who was the Home Secretary at the time. She was a minister in his office, as it were. But she took no prisoners. But she's, and having kind of spoken to her God knows how many times over the years, she is utterly delightful. She's an absolutely lovely person. You won't necessarily agree with her politics, and it's very easy to write someone off because they're a little bit eccentric and, it's just some, batty old lady. Anne Widdecombe has had those views and retained her core beliefs forever, and you don't get many politicians that stick to it like she does. So it's great to have her on with us. Thank you to Anne. Let's go back to your calls. Andrew is in Hertfordshire. This is reference Donald Trump. Good afternoon to you, Andrew.
Good afternoon, Ian. Yeah, Anne Widdecombe, greatest statement ever about Michael Howard. There's something of the night about
that. Was her statement, wasn't it? There was something of the night because they fell. It was over prisons, wasn't it? They fell out.
Yeah, brilliant. Donald Trump, Gaza.
Yes.
Very straightforward. This is what happens when you've got someone in charge who looks through a different lens. So he knows what it is to rebuild that. It's a demolition site. So he's now challenging the people that don't want these people. They're not Palestinian, they're Hamas through and through.
Yep.
No one wants those. So if we look back to school and geography and social geography and the way design was just after the Great Fire of London, that's why London's a mess, because they just built back where they had property. What he's seeing is the opportunity by design to design out the poverty. And as you know, they all mass on the north side so they can be close to Israel, and that's where Hamas gets its power. And it's such an important thing, this. Design out by building out in the right way, and you solve 80% of the problem. The other 20% is the destruction of Iran, and then it all changes. But this is a good plan. It'll be ridiculed, but there's no better plan than that.
There's no better plan, but is it, if nothing else, even if it doesn't come to, you know, Gaza on sea, as it were, with, you know, big casinos and, you know, lovely parks and all the rest of it, is it possible that Trump, if nothing else, he's shaken the conversation up substantially to move it into another direction?
Yeah, and it's fantastic because he's a disruptor in a positive way. Look at all those people now begging the UN and the UN, the ridiculous UN entity that's there that is just packed with terrorists. Yeah. They all want money now to rebuild the tunnels and rearm. Well, he's saying, no, it's not going to be like that. This is what we're going to do. And, you know, it's time for the regional players to step up, but they don't want them because they know they aren't Palestinian. They're Hamas through and through.
Yeah.
That's what they are. And it's very interesting that he's forcing the issue here. So all the trendy lefties are now, oh, God, what can we do? Lammy's off in Africa somewhere cuddling babies. He hasn't got a plan for this.
He has no plan at all. I mean, I can't imagine. You imagine Lammy and Starmer coming up with any kind of plan on this. They will just sit back and watch others talk and then say, oh, we agree or we disagree with that. And that's as far as we'll get. Listen, Andrew, got to move. Thank you for that great call from Andrew in Hertfordshire. 0344 499 1000. Back with more from you. Coming next on Talk.
We also learned today that asylum seekers have basically been given money to spend on PlayStation so that they can play games while they're sitting around doing absolutely nothing, the square root of FA. Thank you very much indeed. We've also learned in recent days that not only do they get given phones and blankets and food when they arrive, pizza sometimes, they get given clothes as well. I mean, you know, the most successful people in this country don't get anything for free. These people get everything for free.
It is Talk. This one comes in from Anna in Gloucester. This is reference to mental health and services, or the lacking of around it. A few years ago, a family member was misdiagnosed, a very long story, and was sectioned. Psychiatric hospitals are not what people think. The hospital was mixed sex and my relative was sexually harassed by a very unwell patient, and the staff told her when she complained that it's okay, he's poorly, he can't help it. She also witnessed another female patient being physically assaulted by a violent male patient. She was moved. He stayed for a few days after the incident. Luckily, a very clever family member was able to diagnose what was actually wrong through Googling her phone conversations with mental health professionals. She was correctly treated and discharged from their care. But the mental health services are in a terrible state. And thank you, Anna, for that. And I'm glad it worked out. But my goodness, you hear those stories and they could be so much worse. And I'm sure that wasn't lost on Anna and her family either. But the problem is getting worse. The problem of mental health issues are getting worse. Where does the country go with this? We haven't even touched on social care, mental health. All that. It's like having 2 extra NHSs. That's what's needed, in addition to all the conventional stuff. Let's go to Ruby down in London. On the voice coach, Ruby, what are you thinking? Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for taking my call.
It's a pleasure.
I just wanted to say, this voice coach of Sarah Keir, very dedicated, obviously, to her work. And, of course, she took the train all the way from Brighton and then I imagine had to take a taxi to the headquarters.
True.
But did Mrs. Starmer was aware of this little rendezvous on Christmas?
That's a very good point, actually, yes. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't have dinner tonight, darling. I've got a lady coming up from Brighton.
And the one thing I wanted to say, something that has been on my mind for some time,
yeah,
and you may check, there used to be a comedian called Ray Allen and had a puppet, Lord Charles.
Lord Charles, that's right.
Yes, you look at Lord Charles, it's the spitting image of Sir Keir.
Lord Ray Allen and Lord Charles. Yeah, as a kid, I can remember that ventriloquist act, and I remember seeing them on like quiz shows and stuff, you know, as guests.
Yes.
There it is.
That was it, yeah. But let me say, I enjoy your show. I watch Mike Graham in the morning.
Yep.
Then I have a break and I come have lunch while I'm watching you. And talkTV is absolutely great.
Well, that's
Saturday afternoons, I keep an eye on the football. I'm watching all your programs.
That's very nice to hear, and I'm very grateful for your words. Ruby, thank you very much indeed. 24 minutes after 3 o'clock. I've just had to look up some images of Ray Allen and Lord Charles. Was it Lord Charles? Yeah, Ray Allen and Lord Charles. Yeah, but he has got something of the Keir about him, I suppose. Apart from he's got a monocle instead of a pair of specs. But then I'm often told I look like Keir Starmer. Which isn't the best news of the day. Kish is over there in Greater Manchester. Kish, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Hi, Ian. Yeah, just a couple of points on the mental health services in this country. In terms of the Callacane incident, I'll just give you an example which is contrasting.
Yes.
I had a few admissions myself between about 2019 and 2022. So during one of them, I was speaking to a fellow sort of patient who had schizophrenia.
Okay.
He was pretty down and a bit all over the place. Anyway, he asked for some leave, you know, just to spend the afternoon. Said he was spending it with his family or a friend. And they ask you various questions before you go out. You know, are you feeling suicidal? Are you feeling like you want to harm somebody?
Yeah.
No. Okay, so they let him out. Later that afternoon, we were told he died. He jumped off a building.
Yeah.
So the whole provision is really substandard, I have to say.
Totally.
And then just following on from that, if I may, with both the Tories and Labour talking about reforming the benefit system, and they seem to be focused, or Labour do now, on mental health and saying that, you know, maybe those with mental health issues shouldn't be on benefits or whatever, should be supported to work. That's a really dangerous position to take, because when you've got people who may not have extreme symptoms like Callacane, but are still quite ill nonetheless, if you're going to take away their benefits or reform the system to their detriment and maybe force them into work or whatever, you're going to have major issues with people doing similar, committing suicide, or having real problems in the workplace, being aggressive towards fellow workers. That is a major problem. And they talk about fixing the foundations. If you don't fix the NHS and the mental health services of that, you've got no chance of dealing with anything else in terms of getting people off benefits or getting them into work. The provision is just totally lacking, Ian.
Yeah. I mean, to put this right, Kish, I mean, what are we looking at here? I mean, doubling of the NHS budget, building a shed load of special hospitals that deal with... What's the answer? Because this is getting worse.
Well, we need much more. We need many more beds, because as soon as you get admitted, whether it's voluntary, when it's a voluntary admission, i.e. it's not under section. As soon as you get admitted, they're looking to get rid of you to free up a bed.
Yeah.
And then the second thing in that regard is, when you're in there isn't really any treatments other than take your meds. Your treatment is effectively when the consultant comes round on his weekly round, and you might see him for 5 or 10 minutes.
Sure.
And then in between that time, you're talking to your fellow patients, and it's almost like a self-therapy. And people who are very, very ill, because that's why they're there, you can't. You're not a therapeutic source to a fellow patient. There's lots of angst. There's lots of irritation sometimes. Sometimes it kicks off. There's fights.
Yeah, it's not like, oh, we're all in the same boat here. It's not that, is it? It's not.
Well, it can be. I mean, you can get a lot of camaraderie with it, but people are ill.
But I was about to say, but you can have the very antitheses of camaraderie and have huge problems. And a previous texter, Anne, made that very point.
Yeah, I mean, one of the places that I went to, that I was admitted to, within 2 days, another guy came in, and within about a minute, he was laying into another patient.
Yeah.
I locked myself in my room, not because I was particularly scared of him. I was actually scared of my reaction to him. And I was thinking, well, I might lay into him for laying into the other guy. And
it's a good forethought on your part, by the way.
It was literally like a bloodbath, though. There was blood everywhere. Yeah. Because within 2 minutes of this guy, who was clearly psychotic.
Sure. And just but had you been in a very different place, then you might not have made that decision.
Well, I was exceptionally close to basically having a go at this guy with my fists, obviously. But for whatever reason, I just took that instinctive. To be honest with you, I saw it coming before it even happened. I saw it coming, so I went to my room and locked my door because I knew something was going to happen.
Yeah.
If I'd not taken those steps, I'd have been involved in a major incident with the guy.
Yeah. I get it. Listen, Kish, thank you. It's a grim analysis, isn't it, of where we're at? And there doesn't seem to be anything on the horizon that suggests any of this is going to get better anytime soon. Kevin in Barnstable says, having Anne Widdecombe on the show means you've been touched by greatness. Oh, if only that Starmer had some of her quality. And I come back to this. It's quite interesting, Anne Widdecombe, because Margaret Thatcher had a similar thing. It was all, for years, and maybe to a degree, still the case, but certainly it was harder for women in those jobs. And I don't think Anne Widdecombe would have been as lampooned as much if she'd been a bloke, even if she'd been a bit of a quirky kind of go. Because, Anne was, sort of famously a little bit school headmistress, sounded very old-fashioned, a little bit frumpy in how she dressed, and I don't say that to be unkind, looked, a little bit, as a sort of eccentric kind of character, and that meant she was wide open for people talking about, she's mad, she is, and actually, she had a great, incredible brain on her. She did have a very school mistressy way, and still does, of delivering what she believes. But I think probably a lot of the jip she got wouldn't have happened if she'd been a bloke at that time. I genuinely believe that. And I think certainly with Thatcher, I mean, when Thatcher turned up in Parliament in, I think it was 1959 or something, there was 19 women in there. 19 MPs who were female out of 550. So you can imagine what you were up against back then. And the times, the kind of era that it was. It was, tricky times, but she stuck to her guns, and I think, it is worth always repeating that the calibre of politician that absolutely sounds that they're not reading from a press release, but absolutely believe. They have an idea, they have a philosophy. They might be left-wing, they might be right-wing. And for the purposes of a democracy, it doesn't really matter. As Isabel Oakeshott was saying earlier, you know, people who have a belief, a real belief, and they want to sell that belief, those kind of people we are missing. How many of those guys are in Parliament these days? Very few. 0344 499 1000. That's where you'll find us. More to come in a couple of moments. More from you. Jeremy Kyle's here at 4. We'll chat to him as well. It's going to get busier in the next 30 minutes. Keep it here. Just gone 3:30. It's Talk. Teresa says, afternoon Ian, your Starmer impersonation, loving that, but it is veering towards Harold Wilson. Maybe a voice coach would help. Well, it is, but you know what? It's like somebody opened a packet of politicians over there at Labour HQ, isn't it? Because if you think, yeah, Harold Wilson, you know, former Labour MP, former Labour Prime Minister back years ago, had that kind of voice, much impersonated by people like Mike Yarwood, Keir Starmer, Ed Miliband, and even, I think you could throw in there, a bit of Rachel Reeves. There is that thing going on. And Starmer obviously has had amazing voice coaching, which has meant that he sounds supreme and slick and one of the great... he's like Martin Luther King these days, isn't it, Keir Starmer? He's incredible as a speaker, is our Keir. Ray and Shirley says, never mind voice coach, what Starmer needs is a truth coach. It's a very good point. Tony says, I believe 100% when Starmer maintains that masks were worn when his voice coach visited. I'm sure this accounts for the way he speaks like he does. Yeah, I mean, no one in a million years. I'm just not buying that, you know, masks were worn. Really? Masks were worn? Well, what, don't have a voice? You can't have a voice coach with a mask on your face. I mean, the whole point is completely obliterated if you want to do that. Let's go to this story, which we mentioned a little while ago. NHS staff boasting of their anti-whiteness stance, Wes Streeting has said, in an attack on misguided diversity and inclusion agendas. The Health Secretary highlighted some really daft things being done in the name of equality, diversity and inclusion, which he said was setting back its cause. Amy Gallagher, commentator at the New Culture Forum, a regular with us here on Talk, joins us on this one. Some of these people, Amy, I think, nice to have you with us, by the way. I think they just make stuff up, right? I mean, I don't even think half the time they can believe in some of the nonsense. But, you know, often we find people are paid impressive salaries to come up with this cack.
Yeah, none of this stuff is evidence-based. And as you say, we see advertisements for diversity, equity, inclusion directors and officers that are often kind of 70 grand, 80 grand jobs. The NHS actually has over 10,000 roles that are in some way related to diversity, equity, inclusion. It spends £500 million on it every year. And in my opinion, the whole stuff is just snake oil because, as you say, it's not based on any evidence. And actually, there's overwhelming evidence now that it's doing harm. It's causing, it's affecting workplace harmony in a negative way. And in my case, and many other cases, people are being bullied for disagreeing with kind of overtly racist statements. It's putting people through these purity tests. It's just been appalling. And I think, you know, Wes Streeting saying it's a bit daft. It's far worse than that. It's absolutely, you know, sinister for some. It goes so far as to really bully people. I've had so many people contact me saying, you know, I've been told to go to this seminar where I have to admit my racism. What do? I don't want to do it. It makes me feel uncomfortable. Should I quit my training?
You have to admit your racism.
Yeah, you
just because you're white, you've got to go. I'm probably a racist because I'm white.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that was my case when I was doing my training. I was sent a lecture called "Whiteness: A Problem for Our Time." It made overtly racist, generalising comments about white people, and I said, well, I don't like judging people by the colour of their skin. And for that, I was told that I had an inability to learn. You know, that I was the problem. I had to come round to these ideas, and that the course wasn't right for me. And in the end, they told me that I was unsafe to be with patients. This is the level of bullying and harassment that has gone on in relation to these really extreme ideas.
And of course, these extreme ideas are not born out of some, you know, years and years of diligent research and looking into the sort of anthropological journey we've been through, our psychology, inherentness of, you know, what our gene pool has thrown. It's based on nothing but a few people's, and it is just a few people, relatively speaking, a few people's idea of how they want the world to be.
Yeah, it's totally based on theory. As you said, it's not based on evidence. It's quite, these ideas are very radical. They come out of intellectual movements in universities. They've got no place in healthcare. You know, these are people will go to university and learn about what certain philosophers and writers have said, but this has no, you know, it has no bearing on healthcare. And the fact that this has been brought in across the NHS, you know, I'm aware, you know, there's Freedom of Information Acts that have shown that psychology courses now up and down the country are teaching anti-whiteness. People are openly saying that their work is informed by anti-whiteness. I mean, it's crazy. It's you know.
How would somebody wear that with a badge of honour?
I know. The indoctrination is so bad that people think that they are being good. And they can't see that it's just overt racism. You know, when I pointed out that, you know, you're judging people by the colour of their skin, you know, surely we're not supposed to do that. They act as though you don't understand, you know, that they have a more sophisticated view of racism than you. But everything they say goes against the Equality Act. And so I don't even know why we need all of this DEI anyway, because people are protected from discrimination by the Equality Act.
Yeah. Which has been around for a while, and of course, you know, the rules are pretty basic, and most people get it. Don't be a mad racist. That's deeply unpleasant, and you will lose your job if you are. And if you discriminate against somebody and you don't give them or hire them because they happen to be gay or a different religion, that's also illegal. We all support that. Every one of us goes, yep, that makes perfect sense. Job done. Let's work in that with that framework around us. Then someone's come along and gone, no, it's deeper than that, actually. No. There's a bigger problem. No, we've solved the problem. No, you haven't. You've got to do this. And then, of course, companies and corporations get frightened, don't they, Amy, of thinking, because some fella comes along, knocks on the door, I'm from the Acme I Can Make You Non-Racist School workshop, and you know, big banks and organisations go, wow, that sounds like a cracking idea. We don't want our staff to be mad racists. Come on in. £5 grand a time, away we go.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what's been happening in the NHS and in universities. They're told that they have to show that they're anti-racist, so they don't know how to show that they are. So they bring in third-party organisations, which are activist organisations. And once they've brought them in, they can't get rid of them because they're so scared that they'll be accused of being racist. So these people then run riot and start bullying trainees and staff.
Yeah.
And it's not just anti-white. I mean, there are a lot of people who are ethnic minorities that do not like this stuff. They don't like being told they have to focus on their race. They don't want to be seen as victims. They don't want to be divided from their white colleagues. I mean, when I was a nurse, I got sent round an email encouraging people to attend a training for internalised racism, and it was for black and ethnic minorities only. So, I mean, it was racist towards me because I was essentially being excluded from a training course. I mean, I wouldn't have wanted to go anyway, but it's also racist to black and ethnic minorities because it's saying you've got a problem with you kind of hate yourselves and we need to help you to not be racist towards yourselves. This is all assumptions about black people and white people based on the colour of their skin, and it's very divisive. I noticed that, you know, in the last 5-10 years, you know, cohesion among people of different ethnicities has worsened in the NHS. It used to be that most people could just rub alongside each other and got along, but all of this stuff makes it so awkward because we don't really want to talk about our skin colour all the time. It's weird.
Yeah, it is. That's a great punctuation point there. It is weird, and nobody would ever run away from, you know, injustice or historic problems or how things used, you know, and that is the problem, isn't it? That people who've taken it to this curious level, this unrequested level, that has created all of this. Although there is some light, Amy, at the end of the tunnel, perhaps here. British Telecom is to scrap diversity measures in its management bonus scheme. In one of the clearest signs yet, the British business is rethinking the role of ethnic and gender representation targets. So they previously got money if you recruited people who had some sort of minority status. It looks like they're doing away with that.
Yeah, it does seem to be that the tide is slowly turning on DEI. I think, you know, obviously with the Trump administration and him being very vocal about, you know, getting rid of all of these DEI roles in America, I think people are noticing that the tide is turning. I think Wes Streeting's comment is, I mean, I don't think he goes anywhere near enough to just call it daft isn't enough. But the fact that a Labour MP, a senior Labour MP, is coming out and speaking about this, you wouldn't have got that several years ago. I think they are themselves realising that these ideas are so unpopular now and that the majority of people don't like them. And in the case of corporations and companies, I mean, it really is a case of go woke, go broke. When they come out with all this stuff, people don't buy their products. So, you know, I think everybody's realising that this stuff, you know, it's only a very small minority of people that really, very vocal minority, that are pushing this stuff, and ordinary people do not want it and do not like it.
Yeah, and also the fact there was a scheme that you could get a bonus by employing some black people. I mean, that to me, I'm quite uncomfortable with that. That's got echoes of something really horrible about it, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, it's implying that, you know, a black person can't get the job on merit. It's you know, we should all just be judged equally, and the best person for the job should get the job. The idea that a certain ethnic group needs help, or that they need to be treated differently, to me, that's the essence of racism. And I know that a lot of black and ethnic people find it, you know, offensive, quite frankly, and patronising.
Spot on. Amy, as ever, thank you. Amy Gallagher, commentator at the New Culture Forum. It is a sort of bizarre world we're in. We know, it doesn't really need to be repeated, does it, about the insanity of not understanding. You know, a guy said to me a couple of years ago, a black guy said, look, you know, in any other world, racism would just be funny if it wasn't so, because it's so stupid. It's based on such heady levels of idiocy that you should be able to just laugh at it, but you can't laugh at it because it's very real. And although, you know, leaps and bounds in terms of progress, it will always be a work in progress to make sure people aren't horrible to somebody because of their religion or the colour of their skin or their sexual. But you know, don't most people flipping know that? Is there anything you can't do in life just because you happen to be brown or black or white? You know, are you precluded somehow from doing something? OK, white people trying to sing soul music. I'm just going to put that up there, right? Can I just throw that in? That's kind of a no-no. Singing the blue... Dusty Springfield got away with it back in the 60s. But you take my point, right? Lots of this is just basic common sense. It's just basic common sense. And if somebody steps outside the realms of common sense and dips their toe into the area of discrimination or racism or whatever it happens to be, then throw the flipping book. In fact, make those penalties stronger in many respects. But the idea that all of us, black or white or brown or any other strata of gender, of the minority or immutable characteristic spectrum, anyone that is in those positions can find themselves also being accused of that. You know, you heard there from Amy. You had some non-white people attending racism courses because they were racism to themselves. Wow. 0344 499 1000. That's where you'll find us. This is Talk.
This is, I think, about putting pressure on all sides, basically, to behave. I mean, obviously...
You think it's one of his negotiating positions?
They're not actually going... Gaza is not about to become the 51st state.
That's Canada.
Yeah, well, it depends who wants it more. That's not going to happen. First and foremost, it's about putting a bit of pressure on Israel, about saying to the Israelis, look, you know, if you're not going to play nice, then we can just do what we want with this. We are big and powerful enough. But the whole thing about relocating people out of Gaza to the rest of the Arab world is also about saying to them, and you're going to have to play nice to it.
A little bit of news on the Southport killer. It's just being revealed the Southport killer posed a sufficient risk to be managed by government counter-terror scheme, but the case was closed prematurely, according to a review. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have thought it would have taken any kind of expert in extremism to work out that this bloke's extremities was all over the place. It went from ISIS supporting to school shooting supporting. What was the other one that I read the other day that was also found on his computer? Essentially, this guy had a fascination with death and extremism in whatever form it seemed to come. And that was flagged. He even rang Childline, remember? Rang Childline and said, what do I do if I want to kill somebody? He was 12. I'd say that's a red flag, wouldn't you? Brendan's in Hartlepool. How you doing, Brendan?
I'm okay. He could go to the Riviera in the Mediterranean, wouldn't he, when they rebuild it?
Well, you see, a lot of us might want to go to the Mediterranean, the Riviera.
I was listening when you had that excitable chap on earlier on, about 2 o'clock, who was really, really raving about that he shouldn't move the Palestinians out of Gaza.
Yeah.
And at one point, I'm sure he said the Palestinians have been there for 4,000 years. Well, unfortunately, it's not true. The Palestinians didn't exist. The Palestine has never existed as a nation, ever. It was a construct by the Brits after we took over from the Ottoman Empire, ruled it for 600 years.
In fact, I think I'm right in saying, Brendan, that you could do your national service in the Palestinian police.
Well,
or some people did.
Yeah, but it's never been a state, has it? And another thing, 2,025 years ago, it was Judea, because that's where the Jews came from, because Joseph and Mary were back to Bethlehem for the census. So, and the other thing, the really big thing is that they're Arabs, so why don't the other Arab nations look after them?
I have no idea. That's always been the greatest mystery to me. But there seems to be very little assistance coming from other Arab nations.
I mean, somewhere in Mecca, there's 2 million houses where people go every year to walk around a big black stone.
Yeah.
I'm sure they could put them up there for a while.
Well, you might think Saudi Arabia is a big country, but doesn't seem to extend its size and dominance to assisting in that particular respect. Listen, Brendan, I've got to move. We're out of time. Good to talk again. Thank you. This comes from Jeremy, who says, my sister is studying mental health. Her lecturer started one of the lessons talking about anonymous comments on social media spreading hatred, claiming they're usually written by white middle-aged men. When questioned how the lecturer would know they are white with middle-aged men, if they're anonymous, the lecturer obviously couldn't answer the question, I can imagine. It's sort of a bit of a go-to phrase, isn't it, though? And Nigel in Brighton, who's challenging me on my assumption that white people can't sing soul music, says, what about Dan Hartman, who was an American musician? You know much about Dan Hartman?
I'm a white middle-aged man called Jeremy, so
I just made the point that I think when it comes to soul music, and I don't know what the physical reasons are for it, but I don't think white people fare very well with soul music.
I think that's racist and unfair, and I think you're out.
It might well be. Are you going to report me to Ofcom?
No, I don't give a toss.
I mentioned Dusty Springfield as an exception to that. Dusty, who was had the most incredible voice.
Incredible voice.
But, you know, I mean...
Why do you have the blind down in here? Can we cut to the chase? Why do you have the blind down in the middle of the afternoon when it's still light?
Can I say there's two reasons?
Why is
Number
that?
one, it's down when I come in here. So
right,
Julia has it down.
Right, well, a reason to put it up, I would imagine.
Well, you might think so.
Yeah.
But, secondly, for so many years of doing nighttime radio,
yes.
I think my lizard brain...
Yes.
I've got a kind of muscle memory that gravitates
My wife
towards
says you're
blind.
like a lizard. You have an incredibly long tongue. Is that true?
I couldn't even comment on
Can
that.
I cut to the chase? There's many serious things going on today which we'll talk about, but perhaps the most shocking news is that Donald Trump has said, and I quote, that he'd like to take over Gaza. And I just want to throw this out. I didn't write this. This is brilliant, though. Do you think that if he built a Trump hotel in Gaza, there would be a Gaza strip club? I mean,
Stop it.
Honestly, it's unbelievable, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't be there. I'd be down the Hezbollah bowling alley. So, you know, I'd be, and that can continue, can't it?
We're here all day.
I like the idea that if you look at every now and again, you'll see something on social media that somebody will say this was Afghanistan in the 1950s, and there's people sitting around coffee bars, and it looks really lovely. So I think that's where he's coming from. But in the absence of any other idea, is he right?
It could be really interesting. Listen, we live in a country, it seems, where everybody's priorities are wrong. Today, of course, the news that that revolting human being, Axel Rueda-Picana, could have been easily behind bars. Counter-extremism cops prevent 3 times closed investigations on him because they thought it wasn't necessary.
Yeah.
OK? He then murdered 3 kids. You have the families of the Nottingham victims, of those poor people. And one of my best friends girlfriend's daughter knew them very well and is at the same university. They're blaming the NHS for failing. So safeguarding is out the window, and yet we continue as a country. Yesterday we did the story about how councils have spent £141 million giving illegal migrants playstations, yoga classes, Pilates and driving lessons to make them feel better.
Yeah.
Today, in the Telegraph, astonishing article saying that these illegal migrants are being taught with taxpayer money how to react and actually report hate crime. So if you come over on a boat and you live in England and you've got your 4-star hotel and you've had your doctor's appointment and you're feeling slightly traumatised because, you know, somebody says you can't win at that game on your PlayStation.
Or your circus skills lessons been cancelled.
Your circus skills are crap. You're never going to make it as the clown. Don't worry, you can report. And our police will then spend valuable time making sure that illegal migrant isn't upset. Honestly, the world's gone nuts.
Yeah, and people go...
And yet we don't protect the people who've been here. It's ridiculous.
I know it's a cliche now, but you've got people, I've got mates who do this, and they go, how did Donald Trump get elected? This is crazy. That's how Donald Trump got elected.
By telling people what was wrong and telling them what he would do to make it better, and if you don't want to believe that, then don't vote for him.
You can hate the guy, but you can't deny his kind of common sense approach to it.
Well, wouldn't you just love somebody that comes in and says, I think this is wrong and that's wrong, I'm going to do this, that and the other, and gets elected? The other thing is these local elections. 5 million people are going to be denied the right to vote in local elections this year. This has to be strong-arm tactics by the Labour Party, led by Angela Rayner, because they know exactly what's around the corner.
And look at where they've cancelled those elections as well. They're all in areas where one particular party might do rather well.
Which party would that be?
Oh, what's it called? Begins with R and ends in a form.
Reform.
That's the one, yes.
A big press conference with Nigel Farage at 4 o'clock today talking about all these problems. But just to repeat, on a serious note for once, right? Yeah, prevent miss that low-life Axel Rueda-Picard. They miss him 3 times because of incompetence. The NHS missed the man that was allowed back out, the schizophrenic. He was scared of needles, Calico, so they didn't give him his medication, so he was free to murder.
So off he goes.
So none of that happens, but we're laying on our backsides and doing whatever to make illegal migrants feel safe and secure in our country.
And every time any of those cases, whether it's about Nottingham, whether it's about Southport, lessons will be learned. There's another great cliche, Jezza.
What does that mean?
Lessons will be learned means absolutely